Beyond the human galaxy, beyond the range of man-made spacecraft and astrotelepathy, lies the unspeakable cold of the intergalactic void. Few have ventured into this realm, and none have ever returned. It is the great barrier that divides galaxy from galaxy, a place where time and space conspire to hold the worlds apart with inconceivable distances. Yet the void is no longer empty. An immeasurably ancient and implacable intelligence moves through the cold and the darkness, its many eyes fixed on the distant, glittering lights of our galaxy. The great devourer moves between the stars and hungers for the flesh of all whom lie before it. This great organism, this monstrous entity, is known as the Tyranid race. Even by naming the great devourer, civilizations betray their ignorance. Every thought and action, every spark of life in the Tyranid race is bound and interlinked into a single mind, a single great entity that stretches over light years of space and is controlled by the immortal Hivemind. 1 billion times 1 billion Tyranids stand at the rim of the galaxy, yet each one is no more than a single cell in the living body of the Hivemind, the devourer of worlds. The Great Devourer. The Tyranids are a race of alien predators that are invading the galaxy from the void beyond its edges. Like swarming insects falling upon precious crops, they devour all before them, consuming all life upon each world in their path, and leaving nothing but airless rocks in their wake. They are a threat to every sentient species in the galaxy, and their numbers are ever growing. For centuries now, the Magi Biologists and Ordos Xenos of the Imperium have sought to make sense of the Tyranid threat. It speaks volumes that with the galaxy now in the grip of the Third Tyrannic War, and with humanity having fought more battles against these rapacious aliens than can be tallied, these luminaries remain bewildered and horrified in equal measure. It is clear that the Tyranids' technology is entirely biological, and far in advance of anything humanity has encountered in all its long millennia of conquest. Their war beasts are armored in chitinous plates or possessed of natural defenses such as chameleonic abilities or veiling clouds of exhaled spores. Tyranid guns, blades, transport craft, even void ships, all are living beings, many taking the form of grotesque symbiotes grafted to their host creature for use in battle. The ammunition fired by Tyranid weapons is similarly organic, be it voracious chitin-armored beetles, gouts of concentrated acid, or bioplasma, armor-piercing shard beasts, or eruptions of bioelectricity. From blades that gnaw the flesh of their victims to tailored toxin spores, weaponized parasites, and even stranger weapons, the Tyranids display an infinite capacity for turning the mechanisms of life to the task of spreading death. This speaks to one of the few other certainties humanity possesses regarding the Tyranids. Their entire race seems fashioned solely for war. It has been observed that few individual Tyranids display anything more than the most rudimentary sentience. Rather, each Tyranid appears to be but a single cell of an infinitely vast galactic superorganism. Mankind has dubbed this guiding presence the Hivemind. As far as the Magi biologists can determine, it is the Hivemind that drives the Tyranid swarms ever onwards towards the galactic core. Through the synaptic control web generated by specialized node beasts amidst the Tyranid ranks, the influence of the Hivemind stretches across battlefields, worlds, and even the vastness of the void itself. Wherever the grotesque bioships of the Hive fleet swarm to attack, the presence of the Hivemind moves with them and allows them to hunt and fight with supernatural synchronicity. What precisely the Hivemind is, mankind remains ignorant to. Attempts have been made to tame the fear of the unknown by claiming that this alien sentience is a god, a galactic meta-predator, a gestalt psychic presence, and countless other even stranger explanations. Yet the truth is that the Hivemind is as far beyond the understanding of the galaxy's sentient races as they are beyond the comprehension of the cattle they farm and butcher. This, it seems, is all that biological life represents to the Hivemind. Not equals to be communicated with, but simple prey to be found and then devoured. Since the first Tyranid Hive fleet was encountered, the number of these alien invaders have increased at an alarming rate. More and more Hive fleets surge from the extragalactic void, each displaying new and nightmarish adaptations and horribly inventive methods of predation. They coil and probe like the tendrils of some unimaginably vast monster. They push in from the fringes, drive up through the galactic plane, and crush and destroy everything they touch. The first warning that most worlds have of the Tyranid's approach is the shadow in the warp. This psychic signal rolls ahead of the Hive fleets like some smothering metaphysical fog bank. Its nullifying psychic static chokes off astropathic communication, leaving worlds isolated in the face of the onrushing swarm. It worries at minds and souls alike, spreading unreasoning paranoia and fear amongst the prey. Psychers are the worst affected, for their strange senses are far more susceptible to this insidious assault. Should they seek to employ their powers while engulfed by the shadow in the warp, there's every chance they will be driven mad or even slain by the chittering alien cacophony that overloads their minds. Then come the Tyranids themselves. Hive ships slide from the darkness like oceanic predators rising to feed. They smash aside the defense platforms and warships that seek to hold them back, settling in orbit above the prey worlds and disgorging untold trillions of warrior organisms to begin the hunt. At first, the prey fight back. Defense lasers scouring sporecraft and winged monsters from the skies. Aircraft spiraling amidst the descending predators with their guns blazing. On the ground, staunch warriors man their battlements and unleash storms of fire to reduce attacking Tyranids to hillocks of charred corpses. Yet, as more waves attack, and yet more, the guns begin to fall silent. Aircraft and war engines are destroyed one by one, torn apart or overrun, and their crews devoured. The barricades fall. Defenders become screaming, fleeing prey. Under the influence of the microscopic Tyranid spores, even the biosphere of the planet turns against the prey, choking them with toxins and dissolving them into raw biomass ready to be devoured. Only once victory is assured do the Tyranid begin to feed. Raw biological gruel flows up vast feeding tubes to replenish the waiting hive ships, who suckle at the world like fat ticks until nothing remains but a lifeless orb to be left hanging cold and dead in the void. First contact. The first recorded encounter between the Imperium and the Tyranids came on the world of Tyran Primus in 745 M41. It was the conflict that would see humanity put a name to this new alien menace, and saw the beginning of Hive Fleet Behemoth's rampage through Imperial space. Yet it was not the only early contact between the Tyranids and their prey. It is difficult to say with any degree of certainty when humanity first encountered the Tyranid menace. Some records suggest that humanity, and also the Eldari of Craftworld Iyanden, discovered a bizarre Tyranid megastructure in the Tiamat system on the jungle world of Xiaphoria as early as M35. This edifice is said to have spanned a continent and to have projected from its mass of chitin and encephalitic tissue a horrifically powerful psychic signal that drove the Eldari into fatal seizures. Rumor has it among the Ordo Xenos that this structure, and others like it, remain to this day, seemingly raised by the strange beasts of High Fleet Tiamat, for some as yet undisclosed purpose. Then there are the ominous tales from the Helican sector in M36, speaking of nightmarish winged horrors that match Ordo Xenos intelligence on Hive Fleet Ouroboros. The supposedly indigenous Genestealers of the moon of Mgarl have also been discovered in the years since to be vanguard organisms for the onrushing Tyranid hive fleets. It is believed that the Tau Empire may have battled the toxic swarms of Hive Fleet Gorgon for centuries. Who can say, meanwhile, what insidious forerunners of the Tyranid threat have been encountered by races such as the Necrons, not to mention more minor or isolated alien empires. Those entirely devoured by the Tyranid menace do not survive to tell their tales, after all. Yet for those few humans, both privileged enough to possess knowledge of the Tyranids and unfortunate enough to seek to counter their threat, the death of Tyran Primus remains the first known contact with this ghastly new foe. The first clue of the horror soon to fall upon Tyran Primus was discovered by Imperial explorators. In performing a census of the worlds near to the far-flung outpost of Tyran Primus, they discovered entire planets scoured of all biological life. Not even the simplest bacteria survived on these denuded rocks. In truth, what the explorators had found were the first worlds to be devoured by Hive Fleet Behemoth after its long and lifeless sojourn through the intergalactic void. Thus far, it had only consumed worlds without sentient life to defend them, for its reserves were depleted from years of hibernation. Soon enough, it would channel the newly absorbed biomass into vast swarms of war beasts ready to begin the invasion proper. Yet the explorators lacked the context to perceive the peril implicit in this ominous mystery. The Tyran outpost dutifully continued to file reports of dead worlds, and the warning went unheeded. That the Tyran outpost had any chance to prepare for the onslaught was due to sheer chance. A returning survey ship encountered a vast cloud of unidentified objects on the edge of the Tyran system. When those same objects turned out to be strange biological mines, the survey ship fought its way clear of the converging cloud and limped back to Tyran Primus, bearing its dire warning. A handful of days later, the invasion began. Commanded by Adeptus Mechanicus Magos Varnak, the outpost of Tyran Primus was no easy prey. Nestled in an ancient chain of volcanic islands, the base was fortified to resist the fearsome storms and beasts of Tyran's wild oceans. Moreover, it boasted a substantial garrison of Adeptus Mechanicus and Astra Militarum soldiery, several squadrons of fighter craft, and 4 huge orbital defense lasers set deep into ceramite silos. Sheathed in void shields, these huge installations were further supported by a formidable network of gun emplacements and Proteus-class bunkers. It was a defensive strength that had seen Tyran Primus hold off more than its share of alien and heretical assaults over the centuries. Against the onslaught of Hive Fleet Behemoth, however, the outpost's defenses would be found wholly wanting. Tyran Primus's defense lasers opened fire the moment the first alien ships made orbit. For more than an hour, the storm-racked skies were split by incandescent blasts of the base's gunners desperately fended off the invaders. Then, just as the cooling systems of the defense lasers began to glow white and overheat, the invaders withdrew. Magos Varnak ordered his small fleet to harry the withdrawing vessels, but this strategy proved folly. Penetrating the spore cloud masking the alien fleet, the pursuing vessels discovered that fewer than a dozen bioships had been destroyed out of a fleet of several thousand. Having lured the cruisers away from Tyran, the Void Swarm fell upon the Imperial vessels with a vengeance. The slaughter that followed was terrible. One vessel after another torn apart by vast tendrils, or swept clear of life by boarding swarms of Genestealers, Rippers, and other monstrous bioforms. With the Imperium's cruisers destroyed, the Hive Fleet returned to Tyran Primus. Thousands of Tyranids descended on the world. Though the laser defenses destroyed many, countless hundreds more crashed into the seas. The waters thrashed and boiled as the invaders burst from their pods and tore their way through the ferocious inhabitants of Tyran's oceans, before scaling the outpost walls. At first, the disciplined volleys of the Imperial Guard drove the creatures back. Officers bellowed orders through the pouring rain. Torrents of firepower scythed through the alien ranks. Wave after wave of Hormagaunts and Genestealers were torn apart, their corpses choking the rain-lashed killing zones between the bastions. Thunderbolt fighters darted through the lightning-lashed skies, blasting apart incoming pods with precision fire before turning to intercept new targets. Then the northern defense laser fell silent. Thousands of gargoyles had thrown themselves into its throat, clogging the massive beam projectors. Moments later, the eastern defense laser ceased firing as an enormous Carnifex rammed through the reinforced steel wall, trampled over the defenders, and hurled itself at the coolant lines. One by one, the thunderbolts tumbled from the skies, engines choked by spores, cockpits torn apart by shrieking harpies. As more and more of the defense network went dark, the Tyranids began to fall into the base itself. An hour later, the Tyran outpost was as good as lost. The bastions were overrun or destroyed, the defense lasers silent. Even the guardsmen of Catachan men and women who had reckoned themselves among the most stalwart of warriors abandoned their post and fled into the driving rain in search of an escape that did not exist. Here and there, pockets of resistance still held out under the watchful gaze of a brave or foolhardy officer, but one by one these were extinguished. Only the command bunker remained, and its walls began to crack under the impact of massive blows. Through the few functioning displays, Varnock saw the flood of aliens rampaging through his base, destroying everything they found. Finally, the adamantine gate of the bunker crashed inwards, and the Tyranids poured into the command complex. Guardsmen and Skitarii fought back with flamers and phosphex, but aliens swarmed through the searing fires and hacked their way onwards. As Hormagaunts poured into the command center, Varnak whispered a final prayer to the Omnissiah and triggered a switch, sending a data codex plummeting into the depths of the base. This codex would be Tyran Primus's enduring legacy, for it would be recovered many months later by Inquisitor Cryptman, a man who would dedicate his life to opposing the Tyranid menace. But for Cryptman's arrival, Tyran Primus's fate might have gone unnoticed by the wider Imperium for long years. He found a blasted and sterile planet, unrecognizable as the teeming ocean world it had once been. The planet had been sucked dry, every scrap of vegetation and every drop of water consumed. As Cryptman reviewed the autologs contained within the data codex, the full horror of Tyran's downfall was revealed. Wasting not another moment, the Inquisitor set forth to warn the rest of the galaxy of the oncoming horror from beyond the stars. A horror Cryptman named Tyranids, but the world they had consumed. The tyrannic wars had begun. Hive fleets. Even a single hive fleet is a terrible threat, and many such tendrils of the Hivemind now push their way deeper into settled space. Worse still, one of the greatest strengths of the Tyranids is their ability to learn and adapt to the tactics of their prey. As more and more hive fleets surge to attack, so the Hivemind learns ever more swiftly how best to make war upon the galaxy. Though they vary enormously in size, composition, appearance, and predatory method, most Tyranid hive fleets have some key characteristics in common. All consist of a number of hive ships, each a vast, void-going organism, sheathed in feet-thick chitinous armor, and with a fleshy hide adapted to shrug off the killing cold of space. Though a near infinite variety of physical forms have been observed amongst hive ships, Most boast an array of trailing tendrils and hooked talons large enough to coil around miles-long warships and crush them to sparking wreckage. Immense beaks, fanged maws, and colossal feeder probosci are much in evidence, equally well suited to consuming the harvested biomass of a dying world or devouring a captured space fortress. Yet for all their vast and monstrous might, it is the seething hordes of warrior organisms born within the organ chambers of each hive ship that represent the greatest threat to their prey worlds. Those few brave souls who have trodden the capillary tunnels and pulsating cavities of a hive ship and returned alive tell of monstrous bioscapes. Endless waves of warrior organisms are spawned from within the bubbling organ sacs of their reproductive chambers. Arcing bioelectric currents leap between synapse nodes the size of electropylons, or wreathe the dormant forms of Norn queens, even now awakening to command the invasion swarms from afar. Waves of hissing sentry beasts scurry along dripping intestinal tunnels and tear through membranous walls to fall upon the invaders from all sides. At their backs come hulking tervagons, unsleeping brood beasts that spawn ever more hunter organisms from their grotesquely swollen thoraxes. But worst of all is the sight of endless swarms of war beasts, from lesser hormigons, termagants, and gargoyles, to the immense and nightmarish biotitans held in biostasis and promising apocalypse for whatever world they are vented upon. Even a single such hive ship has the power to tear its way through a flotilla of defense monitors before sowing an invasion swarm onto the surface of a prey world. Yet, hive ships rarely travel alone. When an entire living fleet of these nightmarish void monsters descends, they and their endless spawn can strip a planetary system of life in a matter of weeks. In their ongoing attempts to codify the Tyranid threat, and in doing so perhaps to diminish its omnipresent terror, Imperial xenobiologists have named many hive fleets. It has been observed that each such distinct bioflotilla exhibits certain unifying traits that mark its hive ships and warrior organisms out from those of other hive fleets, and serve to characterize the horror of its onslaught. Coloration is one such unifying factor. The creatures of Hive Fleet Behemoth, for example, tend towards hides of blue and mauve, while those of Hive Fleet Kraken are blood red, and those of the ubiquitous Hive Fleet Leviathan are most often purple. What significance such unifying coloration has to a single-minded species like the Tyranids is unclear. Theories abound of everything from instinctual recognition between bioforms of different fleets to predatory terror tactics, or even attempts to confuse and mesmerize prey with shifting patterns displayed upon chitinous armor plates. Each hive fleet also displays distinctive hunting patterns and strategies, almost as though each were an attempt by the Hivemind to refine different methods of predating the galaxy's sentient life forms. The warrior organisms of Hive Fleet Jormungandr, for example, favor subterranean assault and deploy immense swarms of tunneling serpentine bioforms to strike at their victims from below. Hive Fleet Gorgon, by comparison, is infamous for the toxic spore clouds and biowarfare agents it unleashes in battle. Its prey forced to fight not only the tentacular abominations tearing through their ranks, but also the microscopic Tyranid spores seeking to clog their lungs and dissolve their organs from within. Other Hive fleets have been observed deploying ground-shaking masses of living tanks, sky-darkening swarms of winged monsters, elusive broods of chameleonic apex predators, endless tides of expendable war beasts, and countless other strategic permutations. Many Hive fleets also exhibit a remarkable ability to learn and adapt from each defeat, a tactic that serves desperate defenders well on one battlefield may prove utterly worthless on the next, as the Tyranids manifest some rapidly adapted countermeasure. Veteran warriors confidently deploying tank-busting rounds that previously saw the larger Tyranid monsters burst like sacks of offal stare in horror as those same shells rebound from newly thickened armor carapaces. Wings of bombers soar overhead to rain death on the swarms below, only to discover that this time the Hivemind has spawned flocks of winged bioforms that fall upon their aircraft and tear them apart. Tailored gene toxins that dissolved Tyranids into twitching soup in a previous engagement are found to be utterly ineffective against the altered body chemistry of the next wave of warbeast the Hivemind has hurled in. Most unsettling of all is when such adaptations begin to manifest preemptively, not only on different battlefields, but amongst these swarms of entirely separate Hive fleets. How the Tyranids are able to communicate such hard-won lessons is unclear, but that they can suggests nightmarish possibilities to the increasingly beleaguered prey races. One of the most insidious aspects of the Tyranid threat is how hard it is to eradicate even a single one of its tendrils. Should a Hive fleet be decisively defeated, either planet-side or in the void, some portion of its strength almost always escapes, either running on primal instinct or guided by the Hivemind. Organisms go to ground or flee the theater of war altogether. For a single world, this can mean fresh nightmares when the foe thought defeated rises up again from hidden lairs, sometimes years or even centuries after the original Tyranid attack. On a wider scale, this phenomenon is even more problematic. Should a tendril of a Hive fleet be shattered by battle or catastrophe, its survivors become splinter fleets, lesser echoes of the former threat, small enough to slip away into the void and regather their strength. In time, a splinter fleet will attack again, having devoured enough biomass to replenish its ranks, and often benefiting from the lessons of its primogenitor's defeat. The shadow in the warp, settling like a vast and terrible pall across countless worlds. The shadow in the warp heralds the coming of the Tyranid Hive fleets. It is a nightmarish phenomenon that, whether by accident or design, has proved a cripplingly effective weapon against many of the galaxy's sentient races. The warp is a strange dimension of ever-shifting energies that lies beyond the skin of real space. It is a churning and mysterious infinity amidst whose currents the passions, obsessions, sorrows, and joys of all living things find reflection. The warp has been both boon and bane to the galaxy's sentient races. It is a source of near limitless power for those who can harness it. It is the ocean from which flows the gifts of all psychers. It is also the means by which humanity, spread out across the stars, and by which the Imperium of Man achieves interstellar travel and communication to this day. Yet it is also the realm of timeless and malevolent sentiences, born from the primal emotions of all living things, and hell-bent on consuming reality. It is because of these hostile entities, known as demons, that extreme caution must be exercised when dealing with the warp. However, there is no alternative but to take the risk. Without using the energies of the Sea of Souls, each settled system becomes an isolated candle flame amidst the endless darkness, just waiting to be snuffed. It is this helpless state of isolation that the shadow in the warp imposes upon the Tyranids' prey. The phenomenon itself is a smothering psychic signal that surrounds the Hive fleets, extending vast distances from them in all directions. Though even races as advanced as the ancient Eldari remain unable to explain how, the shadow inveigles its way into mortal senses and interferes with their connection to the warp. For even the most dull-witted of creatures, this is an unsettling experience and causes heightened anxiety, paranoia, and panic to spread throughout prey populations. A sense of all-pervading dread goads frightened mobs to violence and sees doomsayers take to the streets even before the first warnings of the Tyranids' approach are received. It is amongst psychically attuned beings, however, that the shadow in the warp is felt the worst. Human psychers, orc weird boys, and virtually the entire Eldari race are amongst such unfortunates, their psychic sensitivity rendering them dangerously vulnerable to the shadow's insidious effects. Some have described the phenomenon as a numbing blanket of static that fills their thoughts and makes it hard even to think or speak. To others, it is the chittering and squealing of a billion nameless horrors, the endless scraping of talons across their minds, or the onset of existential dread so acute that it is all they can do to keep breathing beneath its paw. Those attempting to actively employ psychic powers while engulfed by the shadow in the warp are hit hardest of all. Even to access their gifts at such times requires extreme effort, and those who try are as likely to be driven mad or slain by explosive cranial hemorrhage as to manifest even the weakest flicker of power. Crucially, astropaths attempting to send distress calls out to the wider Imperium find their mental cries choked off, more often than not painfully dying before they can force anything out through the smothering psychic blanket. Navigators are equally afflicted. Their third eyes are blinded and their minds overwhelmed by the shadow so that attempts to guide evacuation craft to safety or warships to the rescue of beleaguered worlds ends in disaster and death. It is thanks to the shadow in the warp that most Imperial worlds beset by the Tyranids must fight alone, cut off from aid and unable even to scream. Nor are humans the only victims of this phenomenon. For most branches of the Eldari race, merely being in proximity to the Tyranids brings torment that they must struggle to ignore if they are even to stand a chance to fight back. Moreover, the precognitive psychic gifts upon which their dwindling races relies are all but useless once the shadow on the warp settles about them. Warp sorcery falters as easily as more sanctioned psychic powers, leaving even the servants of the dark gods howling in powerless fury as the Tyranids descend upon them. Only truly psychically inactive races, such as the Tau or Necrons, have less to fear from the shadow. But even then, the insidious Hivemind has methods by which it can weaponize its Gestalt will against them to claim victory. It is unclear precisely how Tyranid war beasts manifest powers that echo the psychic abilities of the varied races they prey upon. Yet the longer the Hive fleets drive their tendrils into the galaxy, and the more of their swarms that emerge from the outer darkness of the void, the more the Tyranids have been observed adapting ever more bioforms whose abilities do just that. Some xenobiologists postulate that these creatures are siphoning warp energy in a controlled manner, wholly removed from anything achieved by any other known life form. Others believe that it's the synaptic energies of the hive mind itself that are being channeled, crackling through the encephalitic synapse tissues of the Tyranids before being unleashed in hissing blasts of lethal energy, projected as shimmering force fields, amplified into sanity-shredding psychic screams, or employed to drive lesser swarm beasts into frantic killing fury. For those facing the Tyranids, such academic theorizing rings hollow. It matters only that the Tyranids are able to employ a ghastly range of apparently psychic abilities to tear apart the minds and bodies of their prey, seemingly with ease. Behemoth, First Tyrannic War. Behemoth was the first Hive fleet recognized by the Imperium of Man. After annihilating the outpost on Tyran Primus, it thundered on through settled space, carving a direct line towards the ultramarine stellar empire of Ultramar. Driven on by a primal hunger it seemed unable to fully control, the Hive fleet appeared as unstoppable as it was bestially unsubtle. It was only thanks to the effort of Inquisitor Kryptman, who followed in Hive Fleet Behemoth's wake, that warning reached Ultramar ahead of the Tyranid menace. The Ultramarines gathered virtually the entire strength of their chapter to meet the Xenos' onslaught. They marshaled the mighty defense regiments of Ultramar and the strength of entire Void fleets to their banner. Still, it was to prove barely enough to halt Behemoth's rampage. The Tyranids overran one world after another, consuming biomass and redoubling their ranks as they drove toward the Ultramarines' chapter planet of Macragge. The idyllic garden world of Prandium was stripped bare. The caverns of Koth became bloody charnel houses. One slaughter followed another. Yet it was at Macragge itself that the fate of the First Tyrannic War would be decided. Here, Chapter Master Marnius Calgar led his warriors in a masterful campaign, doing all they could to resist the Hive fleet's attack waves and bleed away its strength. Calgar himself was sorely wounded by the monstrous bioform known as the Swarm Lord during the Battle of Cold Steel Ridge, and for a time it appeared that Hive Fleet Behemoth would consume all before it. Eventually, a puissant ambush performed by the Ultramarines mauled Void Fleet, and the newly arrived ships of Battlefleet Tempestus saw the Hive Fleet shattered above the ring world of Circe. Meanwhile, on the surface of Macragge, the Tyranid swarms were finally defeated by the unyielding resistance of the Ultramarines garrisoning the planet's polar fortresses. Yet the victory came at a terrible cost to the defenders. The Ultramarines' precious First Company were slain to the last by the ferocious onslaught of Hive Fleet Behemoth. It was a wound the Ultramarines would not soon recover from. Splinters of Hive Fleet Behemoth scattered from Macragge and continued to bedevil Ultramar and the wider Imperium to this day. They are characterized by a brutish lack of subtlety, quite at odds with the cunning of more recently arrived tendrils. Those who have fought against this Hive fleet and somehow survived report hulking masses of heavily armored warbeast such as Carnifexes and Tyrannifexes, much in evidence, supported by lumbering bio-artillery and teeming swarms of lesser beasts. These living fortresses stampede across the land and smash headlong into whatever bars their path. Wave upon bludgeoning wave is unleashed by the brutish-looking Hive ships in orbit, the Hivemind seeking simply to smash its prey to their knees with its clubbing blows before finally delivering the coup de grace and beginning its victory feast. Invasion swarms. A Tyranid attack is a harrowing spectacle to behold. The skies darkening with roiling toxic clouds, and the descending shapes of hundreds of thousands of Tyrannocytes containing brood upon brood of Tyranids. Vast swarms of ravenous monsters flow across the land, slaughtering all in their path. Yet amidst all the horror and chaos, there is an insidious pattern to be observed. While every Hive fleet displays its own predatory methods and instinctive tactics, most invade and eventually consume prey worlds in roughly the same manner. This can be seen in the strategies employed by successive Tyranid attack waves, in the spawning of different bioforms in response to the condition of the defenders and their world, and in the shifting tactics employed by the Tyranid swarms, both planet-side and in the void above. The nightmare begins with probing attacks intended to test and undermine the prey world's defenses. Vanguard organisms, some of which may have lurked upon the planet for months or even years before the attack, suddenly go on the defensive. Lictors and Genestealers act as saboteurs and assassins, disrupting command channels and supply chains with their attacks, or spreading terror amongst the prey populace. At the same time, waves of biological invasion craft rain down from on high. Many are inevitably shot down by battery fire or combat aircraft. But more hit the planet's surface and split open to disgorge expendable invasion swarms. Driven on by synapse creatures such as Tyranid warriors, Tervagons, and Hive tyrants, chitinous tides of Termagants and Hormagons fling themselves at the enemy's defenses. What resistance they can overwhelm, they do, tearing apart armored columns fleeing for safety and butchering garrisons trapped behind their own defense lines. Yet this is not the primary purpose of the first waves. Supported from above by 1,000-strong flocks of gargoyles, the first waves allow the Hivemind to corral the prey, to exhaust their ammunition and spirit, and to test where their defenses are staunchest. With battle lines firmly drawn, the nature of the next invasion swarm adapts dependent on the resistance the Hivemind has met thus far. If the prey hide within fortified compounds or have taken to subterranean complexes, the follow-up waves include vast tunneling swarms of Raveners, Tyrgons, and Molochs. They may also see an upsurge in number of living tank analogs, such as Carnifexes or Excurines, ready to pummel especially formidable defenses into ruin. Should the prey prove resistant in the air, the Hivemind hurls in flocks of harpies, hive crones, and monstrous harridans to smash the foe from the sky. Prey who seek to fight a more metaphysical war may be met with waves of Neurothropes and monstrous Maleceptors, while those able to shrug off more direct assaults may be undermined by the toxic emanations of Venomthropes and Toxicrines. One by one, the surviving bastions of the prey are toppled, worn down through attrition or destroyed in mighty conflicts. Their armies fall. Where the staunchest resistance is met, the Hivemind may even deploy the colossal forms of biotitans, such as the Hierophant or the Hierodule abominations, quite capable of toppling even orc gargants or the god machines of the Adeptus Titanicus. Gradually, the fires of battle gutter, as what was a war of resistance becomes a cruel game of cat and mouse, the last surviving defenders seeking to fight back or to escape. Yet by now, the strategies of the Hivemind have shifted again, and new bioforms begin to appear amidst the changing landscape of the tortured world. Unbeknown to the defenders, another war has raged unseen alongside their own. It is a conflict fought on a microscopic level, or even as their first invasion swarms assail the planet's defenders, so the hive ships also seed its atmosphere with rolling clouds of inimical spores that set to work perverting the biosphere. By the time the prey armies have been defeated, the planet's very biology has also been overthrown and harnessed to the Tyranids' foul purposes. Gruesome spore chimneys of flesh and chitin thrust up from the world's heaving surface. Alongside foul sporocysts dropped from orbit, these bioforms pump out ever denser toxic clouds that hasten the subsumption of the planet's biosphere. Bubbling digestion pools yawn wide, grotesque open guts the size of lakes into which raw biomatter is deposited to be broken down. Pulsing synapse nodes sprout like colossal fungi, amplifying the influence of the Hivemind and strengthening the grip of the shadow in the warp. Stranger and more nightmarish biostructures erupt around or amidst the few holdouts of the prey, towering talons and lashing nests of tendrils that rip down fortifications and spread parasitic infestations. Meanwhile, the feeder beasts of the invasion swarms are hard at work. From the start of the invasion, swarms of these simple organic eating machines, known as rippers, have undulated across the land, devouring the wounded and dead alike. Now, trillions of the awful creatures sweep across entire continents, cramming their gullets to bursting point before slithering into the digestion pools to be rendered down along with the biomass they have harvested. At the same time, Haruspexes lumber across the land, swallowing whole any prey that defies them and gorging on the fallen, before vomiting their immense meals into the pool for digestion. Only when the last flickers of resistance have been extinguished does the final stage of the invasion begin. The Hive ships gather in low orbit, clustering around vast capillary towers like ticks fastening to the flesh of cattle. Here they feed upon the accumulated biomass of the slaughtered world, and of their own dead alike, as it is pumped up the towers to be devoured. Ruthlessly ravenous, the Tyranid swarms break down defensive structures and towering mountains for the minerals that can be extracted from within. They drain the world's oceans dry, leaving barren plains of cracked bedrock in their place. Every last scrap of organic life, down to the bacteria level, is devoured. At the end, even the world's atmosphere is plundered, its protective cowl torn away and scattered into the void. By the time the Hive ships rise once more into the cold expanse of space and prepare to move on, nothing remains of the prey world but a cold, dead husk. The living arsenal. Tyranid weaponry and war gear is entirely organic. Some examples, such as heavy carapaces of chitinous armor, chameleonic flesh, or spore-spewing gas bladders, are integral to the warrior organisms that deploy them on the hunt. The rest appear to be grown in the churning innards of the Hive ships and symbiotically grafted to the bioforms that will wield them. Tyranid warrior organisms and their living weaponry make for a repulsive and frightening sight. It is hard for their enemies to perceive where the war beast ends and its armaments begin, for the two are inextricably linked via pulsing tubules, chitinous growths, and membranous swathes of melded flesh. Few can fail to miss the vicious fangs and talons that almost all Tyranids boast, nor the slime-slick and quivering analogues of gun or blade that most carry. Yet in truth, any part of a warrior organism's anatomy may prove a weapon. From sacs of virulent toxins or corrosive bioacids to fleshy barbs ready to stab forth and impale prey, or other, even stranger and more gruesome weapons. For those not trained in identifying such threats and counteracting them, a myriad of horrible fates await. Many warriors have met their end after believing they had severed a Tyranid's weapon from its body, or after parrying an obvious blow from a chitinous blade, only to be impaled upon the concealed stingers, struck by tailborne bioweapons, or enmeshed in lashing nests of secondary tendrils. In truth, the distinction between Tyranids and their war gear only exists within the minds of prey species, for every Tyranid is as much a living weapon as the symbiotes it wields. Moreover, the utterly alien nature and rapid adaptability of this organic technology is more than a match for even the most advanced prey races. It allows the Tyranids to drag their victims into a feverish arms race in which most prey are ill-equipped to keep pace, and that soon sees them outmatched, outmaneuvered, and fatally outnumbered. Kraken, Second Tyrannic War. Following the defeat of Hive Fleet Behemoth, some Imperial observers believed the Tyranid threat over. Humanity has outlived countless such Xenos threats, they pointed out, each destructive in their own right, yet ultimately minor in the grand scheme of the wider Imperium. Several centuries passed before this assumption was proved the worst sort of foolish optimism. The onset of the Second Tyranid invasion, which would subsequently be named Hive Fleet Kraken, was subtle and insidious. This new Hive Fleet divided its strength amongst many separate tendrils. This allowed Kraken to assail many planetary systems all at once, and also spread the shadow in the warp across a much wider area of space. As a result, it took a long while for word of the invasion to reach Imperial authorities. Many worlds were devoured during that delay. Once the Imperial counterattack began and the Second Tyrannic War was officially declared, humanity discovered the true nature of this new threat. Hive Fleet Kraken was a wily ambush predator that sought ever to encircle, outflank, and surprise its prey. Vanguard organisms swarmed before it, destabilizing worlds with acts of surreptitious slaughter and sabotage. Tunneling organisms undermined human defense lines, slipping past especially formidable points of resistance to attack from unexpected quarters. Kraken attacked on more fronts than the Imperium could defend, forcing its prey to sacrifice lower priority worlds and systems in order to protect more strategically vital locations. All the while, the pale hides of Crimson Chitin of Hive Fleet Kraken was sighted in more and more systems, and the armies of humanity could do little but retreat before the alien invaders. A number of Space Marine chapters sprung to the fore during this desperate fighting retreat. Their valor was undeniable, as was their success in wounding and slowing the advancing threat of the Hive Fleet. Yet their defiance cost the Space Marines dear. The Scythes of the Emperor and the Lamenters were both mauled terribly, driven to the brink of extinction, while the Knights of Eternity chapter was wiped out altogether. The decisive battle against Kraken came when the Hive Fleet drew its greatest tendrils together and drove them toward the hive world of Ikar 4. No one has been able to determine why the Hive Fleet's behavior changed, but it was in this moment that Imperial commanders had a chance to score a decisive victory over the rapacious Xenos. The Tyranids deployed many previously unseen warrior organisms during the grinding and bloody conflict that followed, even unleashing Bio-Titans for the first time. Yet it was the chapter master Marnius Calgar who led the fight back, arriving on Ikar 4 at the head of a mighty Ultramarines force and coordinating a masterful defense that finally saw the Xenos scoured from the planet's surface and the surrounding void. Hive Fleet Kraken had been decisively defeated, albeit at the cost of Ikar IV's ruination. Yet with dozens of splinter fleets and lesser tendrils still scattered, it was far from a spent force. Leviathan, Third Tyrannic War. Only years after the defeat of Hive Fleet Kraken at Ikar IV, Hive Fleet Leviathan drove its tendrils up through the galactic plane. The largest and most widespread Hive Fleet to date, Leviathan showed clear signs of having learnt from the fates of Behemoth and Kraken. Its swarms continue to pose an all-pervading threat to life in the galaxy. By the time of Hive Fleet Leviathan's invasion, numerous other lesser Hive Fleets had been recognized as threats by the Imperium. Some were splinters of Behemoth or Kraken. Others were entirely separate and strangely adapted entities in their own right. Many, once Leviathan began its onslaught, moved to support, shelter behind, or even parasitize the largest of Hive Fleets yet known. Leviathan's swarms were legion, its tendrils spread out so that no corner of the galaxy was safe from the Tyranid menace. Imperial forces who survived the onslaught of Leviathan reported an alarming upsurge in the number of Psyker analog warrior organisms amongst its ranks. The synaptic network that linked this Hive Fleet appeared especially powerful, its shadow in the warp smothering and tremendously potent. Here was the Tyranid threat writ, larger and more terrible than ever before. Great armies, even entire Xenos races, fled before its inexorable advance. Amongst the first Imperial war leaders to take the fight to Hive Fleet Leviathan was Inquisitor Kryptman. Believing the ends justified any means, the aged Inquisitor employed every resource he had amassed in his long and bloody career. He unleashed a wave of exterminatus strikes upon worlds in the path of Leviathan's tendrils. Kryptman reasoned that if enough planets could be rendered lifeless in the path of the swarm, the Tyranids would be starved and their onslaught slowed. His horrific methods met with some success, but they were too much even for his Machiavellian peers. Trillions of Imperial lives had been lost to Kryptman's purge. He was accused of heretical arrogance and declared excommunicate traitores. Yet Kryptman was not done. He next engineered the release of a brood of captured Genestealers within the bounds of the Orc empires of Octarius. Sure enough, a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan was drawn after the synaptic signal of the brood, plowing into the Greenskins' empire and igniting a ferocious war. Kryptman had hoped the Xenos would annihilate one another. However, he was mistaken. Untold numbers of Greenskins provided the Tyranids with a nigh inexhaustible supply of biomass that saw their swarms grow daily. The Orcs, meanwhile, thrive upon battle. In the Tyranids, they found the fight of their lives. Larger and more belligerent Greenskins were reported all the time by the outmatched Imperial forces caught up amidst the alien war. Soon enough, the fighting in the Octarian Empire threatened to spill out across neighboring Imperial sectors. Hoping to stem the tide before it reached critical mass, Inquisitor Nasser Sahansan and many of his comrades sought to establish a defense line, the Cordon Impenetra, that would contain the tumultuous Xenos War. Yet their containment wall was far from complete by the time Tyranid and Orc forces assailed it. The situation grew more grave by the day. This was but one example of the multitudinous catastrophic war zones that erupted wherever Hive Fleet Leviathan struck. The shrine world of St. Caspelin was transformed into an abattoir by the combined efforts of tunneling horrors and the insidious stealth organism known as Death Leaper. Here was proof that faith alone, no matter how fervent, was no defense against this terror from the outer dark. Battlefleet Ultima lost more ships than they could afford during the Battle of Bloodstar, their captains discovering too late that the Hivemind had learned much of ambush tactics since they had last battled its swarms. The mighty Forge world of Griffon IV also fell to the tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan, all of its precious knowledge lost to the devouring maws of unthinking beasts. The systems of Pyrehaven, Ninth Gift, Josmire's Rest, and Abdrala all fell silent and dark, their last cries warning of Tyranids attacking from the far reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus to the heartlands of the Segmentum Solar. It was even as the flames of the Third Tyrannic War raged higher that the Great Rift tore open. This calamitous chain of warp storms split the Imperium in two, leaving fully half the Emperor's realm cut off from the Astronomicon. Such lost and darkened systems were easy prey for Leviathan. Even those worlds fortunate enough to remain within the Emperor's light were battered by demonic phenomena, plagues of mutation, and catastrophic collapses in communication and coordination. Everywhere, Hive Fleet Leviathan surged forward, taking advantage of mankind's confusion as a lunging predator into the midst of a panicked and scattered prey beasts. Yet, the Hivemind did not have things all its own way. Though the bedlam caused by the Great Rift aided it in many ways, it also saw vast swathes of the galaxy plunged into maelstroms of empiric madness, or overrun by malevolent warp entities. Such beings offer no sustenance to the swarm, and so Hive Fleet Leviathan was forced to adopt new methods for fighting these inimical hosts before they starved it of biomass by slaughtering or tainting its prey beyond consumption. In this way, the Hivemind inadvertently joined the fight against chaos, albeit entirely for its own sake, while still devouring all prey races that crossed its path. By the time the Genestealer cults attack, they are already 10 steps ahead of their foes. Enemies find their supply lines severed and their communications drowned out by sanity-blasting alien broadcasts. Keen-eyed assassins gun down those enemy commanders not already turned to the cult's side. From below come uprisings of xeno-tainted fanatics following notorious freedom fighters and psychic masterminds to overrun their panicked adversaries. Perhaps the uprising has been triggered prematurely. A hive of furious insects broken open by unwitting invaders from the stars. Perhaps the day of ascension has come, and the cult's faithful follow their allotted paths to glory. Whatever the catalyst, the result is the same. A world suddenly and violently overwhelmed by the unseen enemy within. As the uprising gathers pace, so its parasitic master emerges from the depths. Long has the patriarch hidden its nightmare visage from the light of day. Now, the entire war-torn world becomes its hunting ground, as the alien monster leads its teeming brood to victory, and ultimately, their own nightmarish doom. Heralds of the Great Devourer. The Tyranid Hive fleets push deeper into the galaxy with every passing year. The open ferocity of their planetary onslaughts is terrifying enough, yet the Xenos also possess other, more insidious means by which they can assail their prey. The Genestealer cults are one such subtle ploy, and arguably the most nightmarish. The Genestealer cults are perceived by Imperial authorities to be a relatively recent threat. Their existence within the Emperor's realm was not detected until alarm bells were sounded by Chaplain Cassius and his Death Watch kill team on the mining world of Gosar Quintus. Yet how far the rot has truly spread is still a mystery. The Imperium is unimaginably vast, the most powerful galactic empire in existence, yet one thinly spread across the infinite blackness of the void. Many of its worlds labor under repressive regimes. The questionable necessity of their cruelty unappreciated by those who toil beneath the Overseer's lash. Rebellion is nothing new to such planets. Beyond count are the separatist uprisings, the schisms within the Imperial faith, the power grabs by petty warlords or crime cartels, not to mention the spread of shadowy chaos cults or the attempted annexations by alien races such as the Tau. It was thanks to all these factors, and the cunning and patience of the Broodkin themselves, that it took the Imperium so long to recognize the danger of the Genestealer cults. On many worlds, it still remains an unknown and unlooked-for scourge. This, of course, only renders the cults all the more dangerous. The first hints of a Genestealer cult infestation may come from inexplicable disappearances, thefts of equipment or material, or the appearance of sinister graffiti praising the Star Children, the Three-Armed Gunman, or the Worm Form. Occasionally, some incautious cult operative may be unmasked while attempting to infiltrate the higher echelons of Imperial society. But the gene cults they serve are as subtle and patient as the Tyranids from whose germ seed they spring. Thus, a cult's presence may be discernible only through mysterious improvements or an abnormal lack of trouble. Tithe quotas may improve markedly due to the efficiency of uncomplaining workers. Underhive crime may drop off sharply as the cult seeks to claim territory and prevent detection before they are ready for the uprising. Should an especially observant agent of the Ordo Xenos or Death Watch note these signs, armed intervention may see the cult brought to battle and potentially wiped out. Equally, should the infested world be subject to invasion from without, the Genestealer cult may launch its plans prematurely, like an insect colony swarming to drive off those who threaten the nest. Most often, however, the rulers of a parasitized imperial world remain blissfully unaware of the threat growing behind their walls and beneath their feet. They have no warning until the day of ascension comes, and the long-hidden Genestealer cult reveals its subterfuge and rises to attack. What follows is a nightmare insurrection that rapidly shows just how far the rot has spread. From the lowest strata of civilization comes tides of miners, labor gangs, manufactorum serfs, and cult-corrupted underhivers. They are organized. They are armed. They are fanatical in their belief that they are throwing off the chains of imperial oppression, and that the Star Children might grace their world with their divine presence, elevating all true believers to a state of divine oneness. These hordes wear the stigmata of their alien mutation like a badge, and revel in unveiling their banners and icons in broad daylight at long last. From wilderness and wasteland come prospector clans and nomads who have long concealed their true nature behind dust shrouds and goggles. Now they race to aid the uprising. Amongst the masses swarm broods of larger, more monstrous beings, their aspect more xenos than human, who wield industrial tools as lesser humans would brandish cudgels and blades. The rebels are led by hybrid war leaders, dynamic folk heroes, and potent psychers. They move rapidly to seize supply lines, capture command and control centers, and sabotage or secure vital sites such as sealed generatora and spaceports. The speed and surety with which they do this reveals just how meticulously the cult has planned its onslaught. Local law enforcers, planetary militia, and even garrison Astra Militarum regiments are mobilized to crush the uprising. As the machinery of war grinds into motion, cults amidst the Imperium ranks turn on their still loyal companions. Adeptus Arbites precinct fortresses fall from within. Defense regiments are paralyzed by savage infighting, or turn wholesale to the side of the insurgents. In some cases, even the most highly placed Imperial servants throw off their disguises and are revealed as agents of the Genestealer cult. Such figures use their purloined power to sow disinformation and anarchy through what remains of the Loyalist defenders. As the uprising gathers momentum, isolated islands of Imperial rule are drowned by the rising tide. Citizens, not even indoctrinated by the cult, may be swept up in the fervor of flinging off the Imperial yoke. Population centers fall one by one. Fortifications are captured, and their weapon batteries turned upon still loyal forces, or Imperial void craft and shield platforms in low orbit. As the nightmare reaches its crescendo, the Patriarch itself leaves its throne amidst its bubbling Genesis pools and emerges from the shadows to hunt. The parasitic demigod at the heart of the uprising. This monster leads the final assault against those loyalist elements still battling to cleanse the infestation. Often, it is not the only overtly Tyranid organism to join this final campaign. A smothering psychic shroud falls across the world, seeding torment and dread as a tendril of the Hive fleets draws nigh. The skies darken with invasion spores and gargantuan tentacles as the Xenos swarms descend. The faithful are enraptured, for surely here are their star-children deities come to elevate their worshippers in glorious unity. Only at the last, when the Patriarch itself falls back under the direct control of the Tyranid Hivemind and abandons its brood, do the cultists perceive the horror of their so-called victory. By this time, it is far too late, both for them and for whatever remains of the planet's overrun defenders. In truth, the Genestealer cults are not the enlightened freedom fighters they believe themselves to be. Instead, they unwittingly serve two specific purposes for the Tyranid hive fleets. The first of these is destabilizing regions of Imperial space ready for Tyranid attack. However beleaguered humanity might be, the Imperium still dominates great swathes of the galaxy and possesses ample armies and navies with which to resist the inexorable advance of the hive fleets. Every world hollowed out from within by a Genestealer cult is therefore another center of resistance undermined, another hidden crack in the seemingly formidable Imperial defenses. Every human settlement that drops mysteriously out of contact with Subsector Command is another lost resource of Imperial tithe, not to mention another potential threat that costs manpower and machines to investigate. In this way, do the Genestealer cults leech the vitality from Imperial subsectors, parasites that render their hosts too weak to defend themselves when the time comes. Worse still, the cults themselves project a psychic signal that not even the myriad faithful are aware of. As the power of the cult's shared synaptic broodmind grows, it becomes a glimmering beacon in the darkness, a disharmonic choir that the Tyranid hive ships hone in on. This signal promises a world overthrown, or else in the last stages of collapse. Sometimes it signals entire systems that have fallen to the curse of the Genestealer cults, or even larger regions still. It is an indication of vast quantities of ready biomass, offered up in willing sacrifice to ineffable alien gods. These gods view their worshippers as nothing more than another source of nourishment, raw materials with which to fuel fresh invasions. The Genestealer Curse. Should a Genestealer slip through the defenses of an Imperial world, it will go to ground amidst the planet's deepest shadows. Whether immersed in the claustrophobic underbelly of a hive city, the depths of a labyrinthian forge complex, or the remote caverns of an agri-world, the alien's curse soon takes hold. The Genestealer begins its task by snatching unlucky victims and hypnotizing them. These first targets are infected with Tyranid genetic structures by way of the Genestealer's ovipositor, which enthralls them body and soul to its will. Perceiving the alien as a messianic savior, these thralls abduct further victims to be implanted, a process they term the Genestealer's kiss. Within a few years, successive generations will be born within the cult. The first generation hybrids are monstrous things, utterly alien and possessed of bulging mauve craniums, chitinous extrusions, and multiple additional limbs. These beings in turn beget the second generation hybrids. Still grotesque, these second generations are hunched creatures with bestial features and typically an extra arm. Wholly alien though they remain, they nonetheless can communicate in Low Gothic and possess a more human comprehension of Imperial technology, along with the dexterous digits with which to manipulate it. Third generation hybrids are more humanoid still, for their posture is now upright, and their additional arm, if it exists at all, is typically vestigial and hidden. Yet, it is with the fourth generation that the cult produces beings so close to human that they can pass undetected in Imperial society. They are still hairless and might look somewhat strange to the careful observer, but their peculiarities are easy enough to conceal. It is during these latter generations also that various cult agents are born to the brood. Specialized individuals such as the psychic magus, the lordly primus, and the scientifically minded biophagus, who all help to cement and coordinate the increasingly complex and established gene sect. Offspring born to the fourth generation are not untainted humans, but pure strain Genestealers. Even so, their parents perceive their nightmare progeny as blessed cherubs, and would die for them in a heartbeat. So does the brood cycle begin anew, with the cult's influence and numbers spreading further with each iteration. No matter how large a Genestealer cult grows, it is typically dominated by a single patriarch via the synaptic link known as the brood mind. It has been proved that, on occasion, locating and slaying the patriarch can shatter this link and hurl the cult into anarchy. However, even in such instances, if the taint is not fully uprooted swiftly, another Genestealer of the patriarch's brood will take its place and establish the brood mind anew. The Ordo Xenos and Deathwatch have identified numerous distinct Genestealer cults, such as the Inner Worm, the Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor, and the Pauper Princes. Each cult employs its own distinct colorations and worm form glyphs, and is identifiable by unique cultural characteristics and strategic leanings. No one has yet been able to satisfactorily explain how it is that sects of these same cults have been found in entirely separate imperial segmentums, but the implications are ominous. The size to which a Genestealer cult grows depends upon the number and scale of a world's population centers. On especially crowded planets, a cult may seed multiple gene sects, each of which develops its own infrastructures, cult leaders, and agents. Despite this, it is incredibly rare for a single world to host more than one patriarch. Gene sects spawned from the same cult often exhibit minor cultural or doctrinal differences. Local customs or uniforms may dictate that cult colors be worn in secret, or that worm forms be tattooed in hidden places upon the bodies of the faithful. Particular industries or segments of society may predominate in one region more than another, leading one sect to boast vast hosts of neophyte hybrid miners, while another may comprise Adelan prospecting clans or brood brothers concealed amongst the military. Whatever the differences, they are always secondary to cult loyalty and the bond of the broodmind. However many gene sects may establish themselves across the world, the pattern of their societal infiltration is often similar. Most cults begin with the lower orders of imperial society. Mining clans, forge laborers, work gangs, sump dredgers, and the like. Such people's disappearances go unmarked, or else are ignored by overworked enforcers, who consider the rate of attrition amongst the laboring classes to be a natural check and balance. As the cult rises in power and confidence, so it sends subtle tendrils into the very organizations that have so far failed to notice its growing presence, infiltrating the fortified compounds of the enforcers and adeptist arbites. Doing this ensures that the local authorities continue to overlook the cult's operations, even as it grows too large to be easily hidden from their sight. At the same time, the cult claims local gangs, militias, and devotees of the imperial faith. Such groups help the cult to extend its influence and accelerate its recruitment, which in turn creates the foundations from which it will extend upwards into the higher echelons of society. Eventually, a gene sect claims sufficient power that it begins to assume dominant societal control. Even now, the cult remains carefully hidden and employs its newfound reach to create favorable conditions in which to grow unchallenged. Typically, it is only in these latter stages of a cult's expansion that they risk infiltrating Astra Militarum garrison regiments and local Imperial Navy flotillas. Such organizations have the greatest safeguards against corruption, and also pose the most severe risks should the cult's infiltration be detected. However, undermining local military forces is imperative if the uprising is to be victorious. Countless low-born citizens are tithed to fill the ranks of the Imperial Guard, or press-ganged in mass to serve aboard naval void ships. In light of the proliferation of tolerated abhumans and minor mutants amongst humanity's teeming masses, This is most often the route by which the Genestealer curse finds its way into the Imperial's armies. If it remains undiscovered, a Genestealer cult can continue to proliferate in secret like this for decades, even centuries. Should it grow large enough, the cult's patriarch may even smuggle Genestealer broods or entire gene sects off-world. These establish subsequent infections known as splinter cults on nearby moons, void stations, or planets. Entire planetary systems can be corrupted in this way, ensuring that when the day of ascension finally arrives, the unfortunate Imperial defenders stand precious little chance of keeping the cult from absolute victory. Bred for war. While it remains in the shadows, a Genestealer cult may seem like a peaceful, functioning society. Indeed, it is blighted by neither crime nor internal strife, and all within it toil daily for its furtherance. Yet when a cult reveals itself at last, there can be no mistaking it for anything but an army bred entirely for battle. At the heart of the cult is the Patriarch, lurking in its hidden throne room and extending its will through the broodmind. With its chief agents at its side, the Patriarch reigns over its subjects like an all-powerful king while they toil day and night to increase their numbers, their stockpiles, and their influence. When the Patriarch deems the time ripe, it raises one mighty talon and sends its psychic imperative chittering out to the teeming billions who worship it. The day of ascension has come. Each gene sect's armed forces form war bands known as claws, which are gathered and disbanded according to the needs of the Patriarch and its war leaders. Even a single claw has the might of arms to overwhelm enemy forces in a raid or skirmish, to hunt down interlopers who threaten to reveal the nascent cult, or to eliminate an enemy leader who might otherwise cause trouble. When the cult throws off its cloak of shadows in fully fledged uprising, its many claws are bared as one. Icons that for so long had been hidden in concealed shrines are now hoisted proudly aloft. Beings too alien to pass as human are unleashed at last, their xenomutations no longer a hindrance, but instead blessed weapons of rebellion. Plans long laid are put into motion. The faithful launch sabotages, ambushes, and surprise attacks with inhuman precision. Amidst gangs, militias, and garrisons, infiltrators turn suddenly upon those who thought them allies. The psychological impact of such mass treachery is a weapon in itself. Precious time is lost as loyalist forces struggle to understand what is happening. Dismay, denial, and senseless outrage take their toll. Defenders are overrun even as they seek to reason with comrades turned insurgents, or to demand useless clarification or explanations from their superiors while they should be digging in and fighting back. This advantage of surprise is crucial to the Genestealer cults. While it is not unheard of for gene sects to control super heavy battle tanks, massed combat aircraft, or the like, their access to such high-end assets is often limited. Moreover, the vast majority of their forces are best described as paramilitary guerrillas, who must compensate for their lack of heavyweight military hardware through zeal, numbers, and cunning. Cult forces, therefore, seek to seize the initiative from the start of any engagement, and to keep their enemies off balance thereafter. Rather than rush onto the guns of massed foes, entire claws circumnavigate the enemy via crawlways or abandoned surface tunnels before bursting forth in sudden ambush. Strategically crucial regions are sown with booby traps. Skilled cold agents infest communication networks, spreading disinformation and demoralizing propaganda, or invade the very minds of key enemy personnel, rendering them puppets to the Patriarch's will. Where the cult has amassed heavier assets in the hands of its brood brothers, these are deployed against the most formidable enemy targets, fortifications no cultist has managed to infiltrate, mustering grounds for loyalist defenders, the fortified palaces of ecclesiarchal leaders or planetary governors, astropathic sanctums, all are worthy targets for the cult's mailed fist. In other instances, such valuable reserves may be held back until the enemy have committed their own strength to purge the uprising, or saved to counter any response from imperial elites, such as the Adeptus Arbites or Ordo Xenos. Should ascension have been triggered early by off-world invaders, it may be the brood brothers who bear the initial brunt of fighting. Deploying more like conventional armed forces, they seek to slow the invasion, often even fighting alongside unwitting imperial allies, while the Patriarch rouses the full might of its following to rise up and counterattack. Whatever the case, the gene sects maintain a footing of total war from the instant their uprising begins. Every living being within the cult strives with everything they have to serve the Patriarch's will and overthrow their enemies, even at the cost of their own lives. After all, their belief in a divine reward amidst the light of the Star Children is total. Sudden insurgencies and hit-and-run raids escalate planet-wide day upon day, the cult striking from the shadows like a many-tentacled monster. The fighting does not end until the last of the Patriarch's faithful have martyred themselves for their cause, or else they have claimed their world in the Star Children's name. The hidden threat. Many amongst the ranks of the Genestealer cults display an outward aspect of humanity quite at odds with the alien malevolence that simmers within. It is only once the uprising begins that these third and fourth generation hybrids reveal their monstrous allegiances as they turn upon those who once trusted them. The third, and particularly the fourth generation hybrids, are the most populous and widespread members of gene sects. This serves the Patriarch well, for these are the individuals most able to pass unnoticed amongst the human herd. It is these hybrids who join the sweating masses laboring in macro mines or amidst the blast furnaces of forge temples, who labor in crop fields or at nutravats, roam the wilds posing as prospectors, or slip into the ranks of the Astra Militarum. The irony is that until their true colors are revealed, their dutiful nature makes these cultists real assets to the Imperium. They are diligent students, hard workers, and seemingly faithful citizens who do all they can to stay out of trouble and make themselves indispensable to their masters. This only makes it all the more shocking when the hybrids turn traitor. On the day of the great insurgency, when the populace look to their bravest and most dependable members for protection, they are appalled to find that their supposed allies are fighting not against the monsters boiling up from the depths, but alongside them. Neophyte hybrids are the dedicated and fanatically loyal foot soldiers of their cult, born of the brood cycle's third and fourth generations. So strong is their link to the patriarch that they will toil for years, hurl themselves into suicidal assaults, or fight in inimical environments until their bodies give out, all without a word of complaint. As the cult gathers its strength, the neophytes work their way into position as militia fighters, miners, and menials. There, they stockpile basic weaponry and war gear for the cult to use when the time is right. On the bloody day of uprising, the neophyte hybrids prove themselves capable fighters. They mass in large broods, their bulkier third-generation brothers and sisters hefting the heaviest weaponry, while the most capable amongst them naturally assume command. Raising their worm-form icons high, they surge forth to overwhelm the horrified unbelievers. The Adelan Jackals, fourth-generation hybrids, serve their gene sect as outsiders. Astride their derp cycles, they soar through tunnels and across dusty plains in tight-knit packs, their mental bond allowing them to move and hunt as a perfectly unified force. Before the uprising comes, Adelan Jackals operate behind a veil of legitimacy. Adelan-class vehicles are commonplace on almost every Imperial world, being standard-issue transports rugged and simple enough to endure decades of rough handling and to run off almost any fuel. Riding these, the Jackals pose as operatives for mining corporations, aqua prospectors, nomadic beast herders, and intrepid scouts. They use these covers to locate new recruiting grounds for the cult, or else to gather intelligence on trade routes, military outposts, resource deposits, and the like. Foremost in such efforts are the Jackal Alphases. These natural leaders range furthest of all, possessing the constitution to travel for days under blazing sun or through freezing gloom, gathering reams of vital information for their sex nexos. In battle, Adelan Jackals act as a swift reconnaissance and raiding force, picking off weak or isolated enemy units and harassing the foe's flanks. Heavier support is provided by wolf quads, light prospecting vehicles whose mining lasers and incinerators are easily turned from tools of progress into weapons of war. The longer an Astra Militarum regiment remains stationed on a prey world, the more completely and established gene sect will seek to infiltrate its ranks. Be they infantrymen, tank crews, or other soldiery, those corrupted in this way are known as brood brothers. Especially valuable assets are targeted where possible, sometimes with spectacular results. The devastation unleashed when the tainted Raychan 457th Death Strike missile battery unleashed their Vortex warhead remains a cautionary tale amongst the Death Watch. Equally, reports from Foley Prime suggest the cult uprising there commands a trio of super heavy Stormlord tanks with which they have wreaked untold damage. Such examples of high-value asset theft are rare, however. The risks of detection inherent in subverting such well-guarded weapons often outweighs the rewards. More commonly, Brood Brothers aim to infiltrate the lower echelons of the regimental structure, then work their way up. They replace each bona fide Imperial soldier one at a time, until entire corps answer not to their superior officers, but instead to the patriarch of the cult. In doing this, the Brood Brothers gain access to reliable military-grade firearms and hardened communications technology, man-portable heavy weaponry, and sometimes even the heavier war engines from which the Astra Militarum are so famed. Perhaps the most cynical aspect of this process is that even as they are having their ranks hollowed out from within, the Imperial Guard continue to train the cult infiltrators in the very tactics and weapon rituals that will soon be turned against them. Squad by squad, platoon by platoon, the Brood Brothers maneuver themselves into positions of trust. If all goes well for them, their still loyal comrades will never recognize the blade laid at their collective throat until it cuts deep. The deformed and deranged. The melding of Tyranid and human gene structures produces broods of chimeric grotesques, whose alien otherness is rendered all the more disturbing for being tinged with humanoid anatomy and intellect. Such beings form the shock troops of the cult. Their xeno-augmented speed and strength rendering them as dangerous to fight as they are hideous to look upon. The more malformed servants of the Patriarch remain hidden during the cult's gestation. If seen, they would likely be hunted as mutants, or worse still, draw the notice of some vigilant Imperial agent. As no Patriarch would risk a full-scale purge being unleashed upon its brood, these beings lurk in the prey world's darkest depths until the time is right. There, they worship the Patriarch and the Star Children, their inhuman hissing and chanting echoing through dank caverns and around alien idols of iron, flesh, and bone. They prowl the boundaries of the cult's inner sanctum as tireless guardians, or slink through the gloom on covert missions of sabotage and assassination. Many toil endlessly in deep workings and fetid undersumps, like grim folkloric horrors, brooding upon the day they will claim the surface realms from those who walk in the light. On the day of ascension, all this changes. These most monstrous broods are loosed at last to rampage through the world so long denied to them. Filled with inhuman cruelty and fervently loyal to the patriarch, they surge to the forefront of the most crucial battles. Here, the very alien mutations that might previously have made these creatures a liability instead render them the most fearsome of their gene sect's warriors. The first and second generations of a brood cycle are entirely too alien to blend into human society. These acolyte hybrids are the foremost cultists of the patriarch, its most loyal sons and daughters, and the vigilant guardians of its lair. Though their minds are wholly alien, they are imbued with an echo of their human parents' consciousness. This grants them an instinctive comprehension of imperial technologies and language that aids them in shadowy raiding and assassination campaigns they often undertake. The Genestealer portion of the Acolyte's heritage, meanwhile, provides them with the raw strength to heft huge industrial power tools and bear them into battle. They employ these oversized and brutish weapons to carve up the enemy's toughest warriors and armored fighting vehicles. Further equipped with hand flamers and auto pistols, devastating blasting charges, and the vicious talons and fangs that are their unnatural inheritance, Acolyte hybrids possess ample weaponry with which to sow destruction amongst the enemy. The occurrence of hybrid metamorphs amongst the ranks of the cult is seen by many broodkin as a great blessing. The creatures mutate from first or second generation specimens, their arms transforming into claws that can crush ferrocrete, whips of barbed sinew, or hooked chitinous blades. Some develop gruesome tentacles that fringe their maws, or quivering throat sacs that turn their bile to bioacid. Many amongst the cult make offerings to appease the metamorphs, believing that to do so is to curry favor with the Star Children. In truth, metamorphs usually mutate as a result of a Tyranid splinter fleet drawing close. Sensing a developed Genestealer cult nearby, the Hivemind sends a synaptic imperative and triggers dormant gene codes buried within the bodies of the faithful. This helps to ensure that when the Tyranid begin their onslaught, the cult already contains plentiful war beasts to aid with the overthrow of the prey world. Occasionally, metamorphs also spawn as instinctive defense mechanisms. Should the broodmind suffer great trauma, be it the onset of a warp storm, the peril of large-scale discovery, or an alien invasion, it forces the premature mutation of these creatures to help defend the patriarch. What errors in the brood cycle give rise to aberrants, none can say. Imperial xenobiologists have posited everything from injection with a damaged ovipositor or failures of bioexperimentation to the influence of encroaching warp storms or even the residual human spirit rebelling against its xenos bondage to the detriment of its host body. Whatever their cause, these lumpen and simple-minded monsters often seek out a biophages and follow their bidding without question. Indeed, some aberrants become the favored experimental subjects of those deranged gene manipulators. Genestealer cults make ready use of Aberrant's tireless strength. The beasts are now set to work out hacking new tunnels to connect cult hideouts, breaking open ancient caches of resources or weaponry, or excavating sappers' work under Imperial strongholds that reductus saboteurs then pack with explosives. The most cunning of their kind are even dispatched on occasional brute force assassination missions, lumbering from the sewers into the dead of night to make a bloody example of one who has proved an obstacle to the cult. When the uprising begins, however, these subtle methods are cast aside. Aberrants make for exceptional line breakers and living shields, and can be cast into battle as carelessly and with the same destructive impact as a cluster of heavy blasting charges. To better herd its aberrant shock troops to battle, the Patriarch visits further augmentations upon a chosen aberrant in each gene sect. From the bubbling liquids of the Genesis pools is birthed a mind-worm familiar, an imp-like creature infused with the Patriarch's own sentience, that scurries to inject its master's genetic structures into the chosen aberrant, using its diminutive ovipositor. Over agonizing nights and days, rampant gigantism and mutagenic regeneration reshape the aberrant's already hulking physique into something more freakish and powerful still. So simple-minded are these abominants that they can be kept quiet with a few pilfered children's toys or discarded carcasses. But when war calls, each becomes a terrifying force of destruction. Directed by its skittering mind-worm familiar, the abominant thunders into battle, swinging its huge hammer in crushing arcs, its ripping flesh healing as swiftly as the enemy can damage it. Agents of the cult. Simply gathering manpower and material is not enough to ensure the cult victory. During its latter generations, the brood cycle produces many specialized bioforms whose instinctive expertise and remarkable abilities render them more valuable to their gene sect than entire hordes of fanatical soldiers or squadrons of stolen tanks. The Primus is a third-generation hybrid that typically emerges from the brood cycle when a Tyranid splinter fleet draws near, or when the cult requires unwavering martial leadership. Strong, robust, and straight-backed, they command their brood siblings with the instinctive confidence needed to rally even the more disparate of cult forces. It is no wonder, therefore, that many Primuses are idolized by their gene sect as revolutionary heroes, blessed by the Patriarch itself. Before the day of ascension, it falls to the Primus to draw up meticulous plans for the uprising to come. It is also their duty to oversee the seizure of transport vehicles and void ships by which splinter cults can be seeded throughout the wider star system. As the great day draws nigh, the Primus takes over military leadership of their gene sect's forces. They become the avatar and the fist of their Patriarch, an iconic war leader whose warriors would follow them into certain death at their gene sire's merest whim. Even before the main assault, the Primus leads the front, masterminding raids deep behind enemy lines and then commanding them in person. When the uprising begins in earnest, this continues on a wider scale, with the Primus now directing the entire, overwhelming attack against the Bray world. In battle, the Primus is a force to be reckoned with. They employ toxins distilled from their own bloodstream, injecting them into the enemy via hissing needlers and vicious injector claws. Those not felled by these repellent fluids are soon cut down by the psychically charged blade of living bone the Primus wields. Said to be crafted from the stuff of the Patriarch's own throne, these abominable weapons suck the life from their victims and leave them as lifeless husks. The Nexos emerges from the brood cycle as the cult's numbers swell, to aid the Patriarch in coordinating its teeming followers. Physically, this bioform appears weak and withered. Fat veins pulse beneath the papery skin of their temples. Bruised flesh surrounds their jaundiced eyes, and a slight tremor accompanies their every movement. These symptoms denote not frailty, however, but rather the immense physical strain imposed by the Nexos' incredible mental abilities. Gifts that render them invaluable rear echelon strategists and commanders. By laying their hands upon one infected with the Genestealer taint, the Nexos is able to absorb a full mental and sensory imprint of every instant of that being's life. They can do this millions of times, compartmentalizing and cross-referencing each of these psychometric records to build a remarkable three-dimensional mental map. In this way, the Nexos becomes an encyclopedic expert on the cult's territories and capabilities, and the sprawling planetary battlefield across which it engages its foes. Armed with this biological supercomputer inside their head, the Nexos acts as the gene sect's strategic nervous system. They direct entire claws of warriors to outmaneuver and overrun the cult's foes, often combining their efforts with the information warfare of the Clamavis to accomplish feats beyond the organizational capabilities of an entire Imperial command post. The influence of the Kellermorph can be seen in the vivid folk tales of the laboring classes and the defiant set of their shoulders against the lash of Imperial rule. It is evident in the graffiti motifs of a three-armed gunfighter with a billowing cloak, and in the trails of bullet-riddled corpses strewn in the creature's wake. To the masses, the Kellermorph is a heroic symbol of revolution. To those in power, it is a mutant anarch and a threat to the peace of the Emperor's realm. In truth, this bioform is something darker and more cynical in nature than either of these anthropocentric interpretations. The Kellermorph is, in fact, a third-generation cult hybrid fashioned from cultured gene strains of the local populace. It is genetically tailored to exploit the human psyche, preying upon the hopes and hatreds of the downtrodden, and upon the desires for adventure and rebellion rife among criminal elements and bored hive-spired dilettantes alike. From its boosted reaction speed and phenomenal sensory acuity to its unnatural agility and perfect poise, the Kellermorph's superhuman aptitudes place it beyond the grasp of heavy-handed imperial justice. Driven by instinct and the will of the Patriarch, this defiant one-man army strikes wherever its victories will win it the greatest renown as a figure of liberation and hope. The hails of gunfire from its Liberator autostubs become the stuff of local legend as they mow down legions of faceless oppressors and reduce even armored war engines to blazing wrecks. So enduring does the legend of the three-armed gunman become that many idolize or even seek to emulate its achievements. Thus, anarchy spreads through the underbelly of the prey world, as the disaffected from all walks of life are drawn unwittingly into the embrace of the cult. Born of psychically gifted cult inductees, Maguses possess an outwardly human aspect, coupled with tremendous charisma and formidable intellect. Behind this facade, they are first and foremost an extension of their patriarch's will, steeped in alien taint and wholly devoted to the rise and spread of the cult. They are agents of subtle misrule, content to operate from the shadows of their master's throne until the uprising begins in full. During the cult's gradual gestation, each gene sect's magus wages a war of honeyed words and psychic domination. Treading carefully to avoid disaster, they forge into the otherwise unassailable strata of the aristocracy, the ecclesiarchal elite, and the inner circles of planetary governance. A single audience with a magus can transform a staunch opponent of the cult into a valuable agent of its cause, or else see them reduced to inexplicable insanity should they prove intractable. On more populous worlds with multiple gene sects, maguses may even seek to outdo one another in their endeavors. Such characters compete for their patriarch's favor with all the determination of rival siblings. Once the day of ascension arrives, however, all such notions of personal ambition fall away in favor of absolute obedience to the patriarch's wishes. Each magus becomes a focal point for cult forces, a potent battle psyker who can drive their brothers and sisters into frenzied violence while manipulating the foe like blank-eyed puppets, compelling them to fall upon one another with guns blazing. The clamavous utterances are echoes of the patriarch's own holy voice, and when they roll like thunder through the spires and manufactorums of a hive city, they can compel millions to take up arms. Clamavuses are masterful agents of misinformation who use their Vox interceptor arrays to hack into enemy communication networks, stealing vital intelligence and replacing it with ominous broadcasts laced with psycho-resonant broodmind feedback. During the years of the cult's gestation, it is the task of each clamavus to spread fear and confusion through every available channel. To this end, they pervert Vox exchanges, distort vid feeds, and work to undermine popular confidence in the ruling elite. The Clamavis feeds corrupted psalms, hymnals, and religious primers into the lower levels of imperial society, each publication replete with insidious double meanings. They have even been known to taint the minds and souls of Astra Militarum soldiery by distributing doctored copies of the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer. When the war comes, the Clamavis's link to the Gestalt psychic aura of the cult makes them a valuable frontline asset. Unlike a magus, a Clamavis cannot wield this power as a precise instrument. Instead, they transmit the nullifying resonance of the shadow in the warp, a smothering and often lethal phenomenon usually associated with the onset of the Tyranid Hive fleets. Each static hiss of the Clamavis's scrambler array is attuned to the unified consciousness of billions of indoctrinated organisms, a choir of abnormal minds howling in supplication to the Hivemind. When overheard at close proximity, this audio virus causes a devastating psychic overload that can boil the brains of any foes unlucky enough to stumble into earshot. Into this third-generational hybrid, the Reductus Saboteur, is distilled the cult's accumulated knowledge of explosives and destructive engineering. As a result, the Reductus Saboteur is able to fashion demolitions devices, booby traps, and lightweight battlefield charges from even the most unlikely components. Indeed, they are driven to experiment and build in this fashion by an instinctive compulsion. Whether distilling volatile solutions from seemingly harmless chemicals, or looting scrap heaps and servitor graveyards for components, their goal is to build an ever more versatile explosive armory for the cult. While some of their creations boast massive power, others rely upon being easy to conceal, and are so complex in their fail-safes that they are impossible to disarm. Others still are so easy to mass-produce that entire broods of cultists can be equipped with them, while some devices are so reliable that they can be immersed for days in salt water, chemical sumps, or the blistering heat of forge temples, yet still detonate precisely when they are required to. To the Reductus falls the duty of toppling the machinery and physical symbols of oppression. This may see them squirming through pipes and ducts to cripple weapon batteries or shield generators, or planting bombs to fell towering statues of the false god emperor. It may lead them to stalk through the shadows of vehicle hangars, tainting fuel supplies or wiring concealed bombs to the tracks of battle tanks, or to publicly assassinating the cult's most prominent opponents with concealed booby traps. Upon the battlefield, the Reductus Saboteur lives up to its name, sabotaging entire combat engagement areas with nigh-invisible devices. Equally deadly in direct assault, they will flit from the shadows just long enough to clamp a handful of demolition charges to the hull of an enemy tank, then vanish again before the explosions begin. When not slinking through the shadows upon a mission of assassination, the Sanctus can be found lurking in the gloom surrounding its genesire's throne. From this vantage point, the Sanctus watches tirelessly for threats to the Patriarch. None can escape its notice. Those not detected by its formidable olfactory senses are inevitably revealed by its multispectral goggles, themselves stolen from the Departamento Munitorium or plucked from the corpse of some elite Imperial soldier. No foe can flee from a Sanctus, for the Patriarch impresses the psychic spore scent of each fresh victim upon the bioform's consciousness. Following this trail, the Sanctus can track its quarry across worlds and even through the vast nothingness of the void. The Sanctus works alone, but for a single soul-sight familiar, spawned from the steaming bile-gruel of the Genesis pools. This diminutive creature acts as the Patriarch's eyes and ears, allowing its consciousness to accompany the Sanctus upon each deadly mission. So supported, the Sanctus employs its wiry strength and grotesquely jointed anatomy to full advantage. Scaling the most inaccessible vantage points, or squeezing into apparently impregnable bolt holes. Once in position, it is only a matter of time before the Sanctus delivers death to its prey, either by the slashing assault of its bio-dagger, or with a pinpoint round delivered from the whisper-silent sniper rifle. The Locus is a gene-bred bodyguard that conceals its powerful xeno-mutated form beneath heavy cowled robes. Inhumanly patient, these creatures stand at the shoulder of many a Magus or Nexus, still as statues, but unblinkingly aware of the slightest threat to their master. Should assassins strike, the Locus embodies the cult's riposte, exploding into a sudden whirlwind of motion with the speed of a striking Tyranid lictor. Robes part to reveal vestigial weapon limbs and a lashing tail with a chitinous barb. Yet it is the Locus's twin sabers that serve as its most fearsome weapon. One swings out, lightning fast, to parry the descending knife or whistling bolt shell of the killer. The other takes the attacker's head neatly from their shoulders. Only once the Locus's master is safe do the creature's blades return to their back scabbards, its robes settling back over the nightmare form that lurks beneath. It is common for a Locus to accompany their gene sect's Magus during diplomatic parleys with the great and the good of Imperial society. Here they back their master's words with a sense of watchful menace, or simply fade into the background as required. Should negotiations prove troublesome, the Locus will subtly twist the head of the neural trommel rod that it carries like a staff of office. This cruel device radiates a mental disruption field that can induce splitting migraines or terrifying hallucinations in those not inducted into the cult. In this way, the Locus helps its master to bludgeon into compliance those who might otherwise refuse to see things the Magus's way. Rampant infestation. Many Imperial worlds have already fallen to Genestealer cults. While some of these were soon consumed by Tyranid splinter fleets, others have become the origin points of covert interplanetary infiltration, or even open military conquests. In this way, some cults take to the stars to spread the curse in their patriarch's name. It is an instinctive behavior of the Genestealer cults to start shipping broods of pure strains off-world as soon as they are established and secure enough to do so. Besides serving to seed the Genestealer curse on fresh prey worlds, this practice also ensures that should the parent cult be discovered and purged, its splinter cults will survive to continue its legacy. Equally, planets subject to suitable tithes may be able to pollute their neighbors, or even send the curse through warp space to entirely separate subsectors by exporting tainted foodstuffs, labor gangs, medical supplies, or redeployed garrison regiments. For those cult-conquered worlds with sufficient military and industrial infrastructure, there is also a more direct route to propagation. It is not unheard of for fortress worlds or forge worlds to be subsumed wholesale by a cult, which then, either by stealth or by force, secures sufficient void-capable ships to mobilize its armies en masse. Unified in purpose through their brood-mind connection, the faithful who survived the war to conquer the world immediately set about producing more war engines and weaponry to bear into battle. Leaders such as the Primus, the Nexos, and the Clamavis marshal the claws to ensure their readiness for frontline combat. What results may still be a ragtag force compared to the regimented ranks of the Astra Militarum. It might be transported by a mismatched flotilla of naval frigates, tramp traders, and pilgrim barges, and may well be good for no more than a single, somewhat amateurish planetary invasion before needing to either replenish its ranks or revert to planet-bound guerrilla activities. Nonetheless, such forces benefit from the twin advantages of alien single-mindedness and the element of surprise, rendering them entirely capable of interplanetary conquest. There are also those cults whose foundations are built upon void travel to begin with. Ordo Xenos archives are replete with stories of isolated pirate bands, beast smuggling cartels, or remote secessionist enclaves that have fallen to the Genestealer curse. The raids and blockade runs launched by such groups prove excellent vectors for the delivery of pure strain Genestealers. Indeed, more than one hardy Imperial settlement has seen an apparently failed attack by what they believed were desperate mutant bandits, only to fall ominously silent weeks or months later. Other void-faring cultists are more insidious still. Beneath a banner of legitimacy, they attach themselves to the personal flotillas of rogue traders, chartered pathfinders on the fringes of Imperial space, whose activities may be the only contact an outlying Imperial world has with the wider human race for many years. The Death Watch are actively pursuing more than one group of this kind, believing them to be infiltrated by the Genestealer curse. Recent years have even seen Genestealer cults stage uprisings from within the labyrinthian bowels of Imperial Navy warships. The security measures surrounding such craft are some of the tightest in any arm of the Imperial war machine, but they can still be bypassed by sufficiently cunning or fortunate broodkin Mauled Navy squadrons, cut off from their usual ports by enemies or warp storm activities, may seek to repair and rearm at void stations or orbital docks where a cult presence exists. While docked in this way, pure-strain Genestealers may slip aboard them, whether hidden inside specially machined hollow munitions or shipping containers destined for deep holds. Other hard-pressed warships may be press-gang entire hive slums or frontier colonies in their haste to replenish lost crew serfs, never realizing the poisoned bounty they are reaping. From such ill-fated endeavors spring violent uprisings that see cult masses boil up from a vessel's lower holds. Tainted naval armsmen turn their guns on their comrades, and the ship's bridge becomes a war zone as turncoat crew assail those still loyal to the Golden Throne. Despite all these efforts, many more spaceborne uprisings have failed at the first hurdle, or claimed a single vessel only to see it blasted to glowing wreckage by the dismayed crews of its sister ships. Yet the most tenacious, resourceful, and cunning cults have successfully captured Imperial warships, or even entire squadrons of them. Groups such as the Starcoil Cult, the Cult of the Shadowed Tendril, and the infamous Godworm Apostles have all taken possessions of fully fledged Imperial Navy assets, and have subsequently wrought havoc and misery through subsectors that should have been digging in and preparing for the headlong onslaught of the Tyranid hive fleets. Even a single hive fleet is a terrible threat, and many such tendrils of the Hivemind now push their way deeper into settled space. Worse still, one of the greatest strengths of the Tyranids is their ability to learn and adapt to the tactics of their prey. As more and more hive fleets surge to attack, so the Hivemind learns ever more swiftly how best to make war upon the galaxy. Hive Fleet Gorgon. No other hive fleet has been documented to possess the swift and insidious adaptability of Hive Fleet Gorgon. Its broods have been observed to hyper-adapt even between one attack wave and the next, outwitting and outpacing even the most strategically flexible prey to their eventual hideous doom. It is the Tau Empire, more than humanity's Imperium, that has borne the brunt of Hive Fleet Gorgon's onslaught, possibly for as long as several centuries. However, humanity has also been unfortunate enough to face Gorgon in battle, as have the Greenskins, the Eldari, and countless other alien races. Two common factors have emerged from these ongoing battles along the eastern fringe of the galaxy. The first is the speed and ingenuity with which Hive Fleet Gorgon has been seen to adapt in the face of resistant prey. The second and more horrific observation is the degree to which this adaptability favors toxic biowarfare. Hive Fleet Gorgon makes great use of weaponized spores, especially those varieties that billow in microscopic clouds or can be launched from bestial spore-caster organisms. The swarms of Hive Fleet Gorgon advance wreathed in rolling clouds of these devastatingly toxic spores. No rebreather or sealed compartment seems able to keep them out, and even a single lungful can see victims' organs bloat and burst with self-replicating organisms, even as their flesh sloughs from their bones. Sinister broods of venomthropes drift amidst the murk, tentacles whipping out to lash and strangle. They pump out ever more deadly gene pollutants to screen the Tyranid advance and choke the life from the foe. Toxicrines and malanthropes lumber behind them, half-seen primordial terrors that surge from the veil of spores, with lesser beasts scuttling around them to crush and trample resistant prey. Every organism in the Hive Fleet has within its body a toxic gland that contains semi-sentient spores. As battle progresses and more of Hive Fleet Gorgon's beasts taste the flesh of their foe, so these spores tailor themselves to the biological makeup of that prey. For each new fragment of gene data, a new effective adaptation is transmitted through the synaptic network. Soon enough, the weapon spores of Gorgon become biological anathema to the prey organisms they are fighting, rendering even the slightest scratch or skin contact utterly lethal. Should battle rage long enough for this to be the case, the foe will surely be overwhelmed, their armies melting away, often literally, in the face of the Tyranids' gruesome biological warfare. Such tactics have been observed not only to outpace and overcome the rapid technological advancement of the Tau, but aboard the plague hulk Vomnivarax, they even undid the warp-saturated resilience of diseased plague marines. Most recently, as it pushes into systems claimed by the Imperium, Hive Fleet Gorgon has been seen striking at agri-worlds. If initial inquisitorial assessments of disaster, such as that of the Pagrius Taint, are correct, the resultant spore-tainted foodstuffs may already have been circulated far and wide through neighboring Imperial systems with nightmarish results. Hive Fleet Jormungandr. Hive Fleet Jormungandr, sometimes referred to as simply the Great Serpent, hunts in a most unusual fashion, favoring subterranean movement and sudden, shocking assaults. It stays out of sight and keeps its prey guessing. Many are the armed hosts that believed Hive Fleet Jormungandr defeated, shortly before they were swallowed up from below. From the first, an assault by Hive Fleet Jormungandr is atypical for the Tyranid menace. Rather than surging toward their prey worlds, its hive ships hang back in the void and employ sinewy dorsal sling organisms to hurl chunks of space debris at them. Believing this to be an attempt at conventional bombardment, prey species do all they can to intercept and blast apart the incoming projectiles. Yet only rarely do they realize their true danger. For each projectile carries within it a living payload more deadly than any asteroidal impact. Even blasted into fragments, the chunks of debris streak down on trails of fire through the prey world's atmosphere. Within, cocooned in heat-resistant sheaths of living matter, lurk broods of raveners, mawlocks, and trigons. Each fragment that makes planetfall disgorges its deadly passengers to burrow deep into the planet's bedrock and begin their campaign of terror. Once Hive Fleet Jormungandr has successfully infested a world, its organisms do all they can to rapidly increase their numbers. Slithering abominations the size of battle tanks churn through the depths beneath the feet of their unsuspecting targets. Perhaps the prey receive some disquieting hints of the threats growing beneath their feet. Outlying mine complexes falling suddenly silent, tectonic monitoring stations detecting strange spikes in deep strata activity, catacomb complexes and deep-dug armories vanishing into mysterious chasms. Yet, it is rare indeed that the prey will grasp the true peril, especially while fully engaged defending against ongoing attacks from the Hive ships on high. Then come the subterranean swarms as the Great Serpent strikes. Tunneling horrors explode from the depths to devour entire garrisons. Swarms burst from hidden tunnels like insects from a kicked hive. Towering fortifications and refugee-packed population centers alike fall to sudden, ravenous attack from below, and one by one, the prey world's lights go dark. Even should the defenders somehow see off this onslaught from above and below, the surviving warrior organisms simply go to ground in the deep places their foes cannot reach. There, they build their strength once again, even as the unsuspecting prey declare a hard-won victory and begin to rebuild. Soon enough, the serpent rises again and again and again. Hive Fleet Kronos. Faced with the sudden upsurge in demonic incursions caused by the Great Rift, the Hivemind has been forced to adapt swiftly. Hive Fleet Kronos is an example of its newly refined strategy for doing battle with ethereal enemies that provide no biomass to replenish, that expended in driving them back. The swarms of Hive Fleet Kronos fight with unusual strategic caution. Their advance is preceded by a shadow in the warp, vastly more powerful than that manifested by any other Hive Fleet. While some have observed this phenomenon to have a more restricted area of effect than the shadow cast by most Hive Fleets, the trade-off is more than borne out by its impact. Kronos' shadow actively drains the life from psychically capable prey, siphoning their energies to fortify the swarm, leaving them as nothing but crumbling husks. Empiric manifestations falter and fade beneath the suffocating shroud. Eyewitness accounts have even cited warp rifts shrinking before the Hive fleet's approach, and demonic entities snuffed like candle flames. Of course, all such statements have been suppressed by the Inquisition, for they deal with proscribed warp phenomena. Yet, the fact of Hive Fleet Kronos' contra-empiric powers remains. Once its swarms commit to battle, this Hive Fleet focuses on ranged warfare and commits to close assault only where victory is guaranteed. Its warrior organisms instinctively conserve biomass, while feeder beasts concentrate on recycling all dead Tyranid matter as swiftly and efficiently as possible. More than one commander has been wrong-footed as their well-braced static defenses were blasted methodically apart by salvos of bio-incendiaries, living artillery bombardments, and pinpoint hails of chitinous shards. Hive Fleet Kronos enjoys a symbiotic relationship with the tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan, which have been observed predating but not devouring entire worlds worth of biomass. Following behind the larger fleets, the swarms of Kronos replenish their might from these macabre larders before rejoining the fight against inimical warp incursions. In this way, Kronos' tendrils have slowly worked their way along the fringes of the Great Rift, focusing on chaos-corrupted systems with the potential to threaten the progress of other Hive fleets. They lash out like the stinger of some monstrous beast before withdrawing to regather their strength. It might be tempting for prey races to believe Hive Fleet Kronos an unlikely ally in the fight against chaos. Such hopes are soon dashed. Wherever possible, the swarms of Kronos pick off vulnerable prey worlds, consuming biomass with ravenous ferocity to fuel their ongoing fight against their true enemies. Moreover, this Hive Fleet's swarms have been observed targeting psychic prey, be that Osurnyani craft worlds, sorcerous heretic cults, or human systems in the grip of mass psychic mutation. Whether this is an attempt to absorb more psyker biomass or to eliminate potential conduits for demonic incursion is unclear. But with the energies of the Great Rift accelerating the psychic potential of almost every race in the galaxy, it is a disturbing and dangerous new precedent. Hive Fleet Hydra. At first glance, Hive Fleet Hydra presents as amongst the smaller and less perilous of its kind. This impression is only reinforced by its hive ship's seeming contentment to lurk in the wake of larger swarms and feed on their scraps. It is only when Hydra surges suddenly forward to attack that the illusion is shattered. Hive Fleet Hydra has only recently arrived in the galaxy. By following routes already taken by larger, slower tendrils of other hive fleets, it has made alarming speed toward the galactic core. In order to maintain their reserves of biomass, Hydra's hive ships scavenge mercilessly, devouring the shattered remnants of splinter fleets and defeated tendrils as readily as more conventional prey species. Its invasion swarms also descend upon planets that have only recently withstood the onslaught of other hive fleets, finishing off these weakened prey worlds and devouring their despairing defenders. Magos xenobiologist Ekaros van Zendecteren has studied Hive Fleet Hydra's advance into the galaxy. After first watching from a safe distance as its swarms consumed the mining world of Corstock, advanced stealth shrines on the Magos' survey ship have allowed him to trail his monstrous quarry while remaining hidden, thus far at least, from the hive ship's senses. Van Zendrek has made and transmitted copious notes on the swift advance of Hydra, extrapolating its unusual tactics from his observations. It is fortunate for the Imperium that this is the case. When the swarms of Hive Fleet Hydra unleash their true fury, it is rare indeed that any prey survive to recount their experiences. Van Zendrek has established that the hive ships of Hydra retain enormous reserves of biomass. They seem able to deploy it with tremendous speed, awakening or spawning huge swarms in a terrifyingly short time span. Moreover, thanks to its rapacious consumption of other Splinter Fleet's remnants, Hive Fleet Hydra appears to have absorbed the sense memories of many defeated predecessors and learned swiftly from them. From a compact core, Hydra can thus spawn sudden, enormous invasion swarms and vast masses of defensive void organisms at need, all of which possess instincts honed through the deaths of all those they have predated. Hive Fleet Hydra's insidious threat response reflex does not end there. During the early stages of planetary invasion, its hive ships seed the upper atmosphere of the prey world with vast shoals of tyrannocytes, within which slumber broods of warrior organisms. When bioforms fighting on the surface meet stiff resistance, they send out pulses through the synaptic network as they die. These signals trigger the floating tyrannocytes, which plunge groundward, bearing their monstrous cargo to the spot where their fellows were slain. Thus, in slaying one brood of warrior organisms, prey soon find themselves facing thrice that number of foes, then countless more again. Soon enough, even the mightiest defenses are overrun by the might of Hive Fleet Hydra's seemingly endless swarms. Hive Fleet Tiamat. Hive Fleet Tiamat is heavily adapted for defensive warfare. This alone has been enough to draw puzzled and alarmed scrutiny from many prey races, for the fleet's behavior seems atypical of the usual, never-ending predatory onslaught. The more that groups like humanity's Ordo Xenos or the seers of Craftworld Eondin learn of Tiamat, the deeper grows their dread. Only recently have the prey races of the galaxy begun to suspect the true threat posed by Hive Fleet Tiamat. At least one faction within the Ordo Xenos has come to believe that Tiamat's vanguard organisms may have been present in the galaxy from as early as M35, and that working slowly and stealthily, these Tyranids have been laboring to fashion some dreadful bioconstruct ever since. Unlike those of other Hive fleets, the tendrils of Tiamat have remained concentrated within one region of space. They coil about the Tiamat system that gave their Hive fleet its imperial designation. Until recently, they have seemed almost dormant, content to slither out and snatch away unlucky convoys of merchant craft or overrun worlds possessed of no sentient life. The only time prey species have truly suffered Tiamat's wrath has been when their forces have attempted to investigate or purge the Hive Fleet's swarms. At such times, they have found themselves facing tremendously resilient warrior organisms, whose chitinous armor is diamond hard, and whose flesh regrows as rapidly as attackers can wound it. Tiamat's swarms fight in overlapping waves, each bulwark capable of soaking up tremendous punishment and bogging down the prey long enough for encircling broods to close about them like a monstrous claw snapping shut. So costly have assaults against Hive Fleet Tiamat proven that in a galaxy replete with more active invading threats, they have been infrequent and hard to justify. Only now, as the Hive Fleet's tendrils multiply and push aggressively outward, does the folly of such inactivity become clear. Tales abound of a Genestealer cult calling itself the Choir of the Void, whose adherents have arisen on many worlds, only to take ship en masse once their uprisings have succeeded. The choir leave abandoned worlds in their wake, sailing unmolested into the heart of Tiamat territory, and bringing great feasts of biomass to their supposed deities. Meanwhile, records resurface of a terrible biostructure upon the world of Zeophoria in the Tiamat system, as more and more psychers complain of a building psychic scream emanating from that world. Those in power begin to ask what fell purpose the Tyranid's biostructure might serve, and what nightmare may befall the galaxy should it reach completion. Hive Fleet Ouroboros. The swarms of Hive Fleet Ouroboros bring death on dark wings, striking swiftly and in great numbers. Their warrior organisms fill the skies of the prey world and descend with piercing shrieks to rend and tear. Imperial xenobiologists and scholars of alien apocrypha have theorized that Hive Fleet Ouroboros may be the most ancient of its kind. Some point to historical accounts drawn from dust-drowned archives and originally penned by Cardinal Miramulius the Elder. Miramulius tells of the Legion of Ouroboros, describing a host of winged Xenos horrors aflame with infernal ague that descended upon the worlds around Thracian Primaris. The Cardinal's accounts detail the Xenos stripping all life from the worlds they invaded, while subsequent investigations by inquisitorial teams have noted distinctive bioplasmic scarring upon relics surviving from that war to defeat that rapacious threat. Other savants, more versed in the biologian arts, cite the primitive nature of Hive Fleet Ouroboros' organisms as an indicator of its antiquity. Organic samples recovered from battles against this Hive Fleet appear almost primordial in their rugged simplicity, especially when compared to more refined biomorphs of Hive Fleets such as Leviathan or Kronos. Far from being a weakness of Hive Fleet Ouroboros, however, the horrified accounts of those who have battled its swarms reveal this simplicity to be a strength. Strategies refined during the Tyrannic Wars prove ineffectual against Ouroboros' warrior organisms. Armies expecting to exploit anatomical weak spots, carefully documented instinctive behaviors, or vulnerabilities to tailored gene toxins discover too late that these Tyranids do not possess them. Lessons learnt over centuries of warfare against the Tyranid menace must be hastily discarded in favor of a far more basic and bloody-minded defensive tactics. It is a realization that comes to many prey worlds too late to be of aid. Even those who do grasp swiftly how to combat Hive Fleet Ouroboros face a daunting and nightmarish fight for survival. Its invasion swarms favor airborne organisms, filling the prey world's skies with teeming billions of gargoyles interspersed with descending spore clouds. Larger shapes cut through these living thunderheads, vast aerial monstrosities plowing through the screeching masses like deep-sea leviathans scattering shoals of fish. So thick do the flying organisms swarm that they blot out the daylight, plummeting to attack in the unnatural twilight cast by their leathery wings. The eerie glow that surrounds their bioweapons the only light. Their onslaught comes with shocking speed, and wherever possible, Ouroboros' organisms strike at command posts and any prey they identify as being military or spiritual leaders. Masses of chittering, clawing, flapping monsters topple vox masts with their sheer weight, wash out auspex screens in a blizzard of amorphous contacts, and pluck messengers screaming into the air to be torn apart. In this way, Ouroboros claws out the eyes of its prey, blinding them strategically on a planet-wide scale, and plunging the defenders into ignorance and panic. Dragged down to the same primitive level as the monsters attacking them from on high, knots of frightened soldiery huddled together for protection, They cower in subterranean bolt holes, staying within the dwindling circles of their light sources and crackling fires, and praying to their deities for salvation. All that comes in answer are fresh waves of Tyranid ground troops and hidden horrors that systematically hunt down every last hidden prey enclave, flushing them onto the surface, where the last desperate end. The sky swarms descend upon them with exultant shrieks. Only one prey species in the galaxy remains consistently unfazed by Hive Fleet Ouroboros. Most orcs care little for strategy, and wouldn't recognize global coordination if it grew fangs and bit them. As such, green-skinned warbands welcome the onslaught of the skyborn swarms of Hive Fleet Ouroboros with the same glee they would any other good fight. More than happy to fight war on a crude and primitive level, the orcs have defeated Ouroboros' swarms on more than one occasion. The Tyranid hive fleets push deeper into the galaxy with every passing year. The open ferocity of their planetary onslaughts is terrifying enough. Yet the Xenos also possess other, more insidious means by which they can assail their prey. The Genestealer cults are one such subtle ploy, and arguably the most nightmarish. Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor. The cult of the Four-Armed Emperor is cunning, wily, and endlessly patient. Its cultists are the masters of the subterranean assault. Wherever one of their devoted walks in the open, 1,000 more lurk beneath, ready to surge up for the kill. The Imperium first grasped the true threat presented by the Genestealer cults during operations on the Delver world of Gosar Quintus. The discovery was made by renowned chaplain Orton Cassius and his Death Watch kill team, who were investigating the mysterious disappearance of Inquisitor Chagrin on that world. The Space Marines fought their way through a cauldron of bloodshed and Xenos horror, uncovering the corruption of the planet's ruling Trist dynasty, and eventually escaping with crucial information extracted from Gosar Quintus's shipping holographs. This evidence revealed a nightmare pattern of splinter spread that had already moved far beyond a single world. Rather than merely spreading in secret, the cult of the Four-Armed Emperor works so hard to increase its industrial output that its members are actively recruited by legitimate bodies. Blind to the consequences, the adepts of the Departamento Minatorum have shipped the cult's agents far and wide as exemplars of an efficient imperial workforce. Within weeks of each transfer, the cult's operations begin anew, its leaders preparing the way for an import of pure-strain Genestealers once the transit connection is well enough established. In this way, the Trist dynasty has spread the cult of the Four-Armed Emperor across half of the galaxy. As consummate miners and subterranean explorers, its followers have learned well how to thrive in the darkness, keeping their secrets buried beneath layers of respectability. The cult of the Four-Armed Emperor is a galactic infection rather than a local one. For of all the cults, it is they who are the big thinkers, the plotters in the shadows. Despite the Death Watch's best efforts to track them down and purge them from existence, the cult's warrens now honeycomb hundreds of Delver worlds. The war leaders of the cult of the Four-Armed Emperor fight as much in the daylight as in the dark. They seek out the schematics for every building and conjuration they reach, maximizing the potential of each underground network and altering plans so that new areas are built. They then erase all record of these works and ensure that all those involved in the creation who are not broodkin are relocated or slain. These visionaries push their tendrils into every level of society, but make particular use of the countercultures and underground elements who may know the territory better than any surface dweller. Of all the cults, it is this troglodytic brotherhood that best uses the techniques of demolition, undermining, and ambush from below. They have industrialized their way of war, turning the lumbering giant of the imperial workforce against its masters. To strike against them is to kick a termite nest, only to find that those who crawl across the surface are but the tiniest fraction of a teeming colony dwelling in the cavities beneath. Few indeed are those who survive such a deadly mistake. Those who do spread chilling tales of arisen horrors and tides of subterranean nightmares seething up to claim the surface world. The Hive Cult. The Hive Cult are militant, organized, and hierarchical. They infiltrate not only the criminal underworlds and hive gangs of their host planets, but also place special emphasis upon subverting the Astra Militarum regiments that recruit from them. To the Hive Cult, it is a divine duty to be armed and dangerous. The Hive Cult's leaders prioritize recruiting warriors, regardless of their provenance. Should a convert have access to a sword, a gun, or even better, a tank, their contribution to the uprising will be all the more formidable on the day of ascension. Each gun stolen is worth 2 when the insurrection begins. The Genesis infestation of the Hive Cult began on New Gidlam, a hive world with 13 ancient cities upon its pollution-blasted surface. Each of these vast, man-made mountains harbors tens of billions of souls, and all bar one have been conquered by the Hive Cult. Only Hive Tyranids holds out, its lessons learnt at the expense of every other population center. Even so, its lower levels are constantly besieged, and its future looks bleak. The cult's emergence on New Gidlam began with a spate of ritual killings. A warlike Underhive family sprang up around a brood of pure-strain Genestealers. These Xeno specimens were purchased from a self-appointed Xeno Czar and smuggled into the city by furtive gangers looking for a secret weapon to use against their enemies. brought swiftly into the sway of the Genestealer they called the First Father. The Gangers went on the warpath and soon overran their rivals. In the meantime, the aristocracy of the Hive had also been infected by the cult's savage ambition. Its magus, Vokar Mai, was at the center of the shadowy operation. He brought the ruling dynasties into line one by one, swaying them with his psychic influence and uncanny charisma. Those who proved intractable or too powerful were dispatched with subtle acts of murder, first by Mai himself, later by other cult operatives such as the Sanctus, sowing the urban legend of the White Creeper amongst the aristocrats of the Hive Spires. New Gidlam's principal human exports, skilled roachworm silkers, and recruits for the Astra Militarum spread the infection of the Hive cult from the outer worlds of the Segmentum Solar to its heartlands. With many Imperial Guard regiments recruiting from the gangers of those worlds, the Hive cult spread ever further. Hidden gang signs and electus worn under the skin enabled those of the Hive cult to identify one another and to spread their creed in the endless hours of inactivity that typified life between engagements. When the Hive fleet carry out an insurrection, many of the Astra Militarum regiments sent to put down the uprising include thousands of members bearing the worm form upon their skin. These agents of the cult betray their regiments from within, and with armored squadrons and even super heavy tanks, turning to fight alongside the rising tide of the underworld. The Loyalists are often overcome in a matter of a few bloody days. The Hive cult's chillingly efficient manner of taking over territory has proved incredibly effective. Coordinated by gifted Nexos strategists who marshal and distribute their faithful with military precision, the cult has endless ranks of soldiery marching to the beat of the First Father's drum. They have unparalleled access to warships, aerial assets, and troop transports, and with thousands of infected gangers working in the lower levels of Imperial cities to undermine their planets from the bottom up, they can attack host societies at every level simultaneously. Some even whisper that the Sol system itself has come under threat from the Hive cult, for reports of their presence in the Segmentum Solar are becoming ever more common. The Bladed Cog. The cult of the Bladed Cog is born as much of metal as it is of raw human stock, and is further augmented by the extragalactic anatomies of the Tyranids. This great blend of human, Xenos beast, and war machine is a deadly threat to its Adeptus Mechanicus hosts. Feynminster Gamma was once a humble planet, its people often referring to it as a cog in the great machine. Since its oppressed masses embraced new rulers from far beyond the stars, that mantra has been abandoned, and the metaphorical cog has turned into an entire manufactorum of war. The seeds of this change were planted with the coming of tech priest Dominus Ovid Thrinsium, who would become known to the locals as the Great Miser. When it became clear that Feynminster Gamma's struggling power grid could not resupply Thrinsium's forces, the tech priests opted to harvest bioelectricity from the planet's populace instead. Civil unrest was inevitable. Slave workers rose up in their thousands, but their improvised weapons were no match for Thrinsium's clades of cyborg killers. The uprising was crushed, but in his greed for more energy, the tech priest spared many of the insurgents, leaving the embers of rebellion glowing. Into this fertile breeding ground came a pure strain Genestealer, and a new deliverance movement soon followed. The code brands and electus born by citizen workers were altered into illicit inker dens to jibe with the new imagery of the emergent cult, and the Omnissiah's cog was adapted to better resemble the Creed's jag-spined emblem. Every hour, the planet's forge temples produced a new clutch of battle tanks and servitor pattern transports. These too were taken by the cult and daubed with its rebellious insignia. Though it took the mental onslaught of the Patriarch itself to achieve it, many Skitarii were also turned. Their electrospore signatures and new spheric auras gained them entry into many areas that should have been forbidden and allowed the cult to spread unchecked. The Day of Ascension was triggered only when every parameter run through exhaustive simulations by the former Skitarii Alpha, who acted as the cult's nexus, pointed towards victory. With mathematical precision, Thrinsium's electrophagic regime was overthrown, the tech priest himself slain by a Sanctus's biomutative bullet. On that day, the broodkin of the bladed cog swapped one set of cruel masters for another. The cult of the bladed cog now seeks to blend the stuff of the alien with that of the machine. Cyborgized bodies are common, their tortured anatomies as much metal, wire, and hydraulics as they are alien chitin and fused human bone. The bionic creatures that form the vanguard of the cult's uprisings are blasphemies against the Omnissiah. The cult's quest can never reach true fruition, for the Tyranid is as alien and distant from the holy machine as it is possible to be. Yet, this does not stop the bladed cog from pursuing their crazed agenda with the fervor of fanatics. Bladed cog cultists depict their deity, the clawed Omnissiah, as having robotic pincers alongside the primary talon limbs that would be familiar to many Ordo Xenos Inquisitors. Some even go so far as to join their armaments with their own bodies, undergoing painful surgery until they become one with their weaponry. Others focus on defiling the mechanical bounty of the Omnissiah by employing it in the cult's name. The machine spirits of battle tanks and artillery platforms are forced into unwilling compliance, while blasphemous scavenging and wanton innovation see the machinery of oppression converted into deadly explosives and industrial-scale weapons to be borne into battle against the oppressive cult Mechanicus. The Pauper Princes. The Pauper Princes believe that greatness can only be found in self-sacrifice and humility. Zealous to the point of mania, they bring the edifice of the Imperium low to ensure the new order can thrive, even if it costs every life save that of the Patriarch itself. The Pauper Princes are devoted worshippers of the Star Children. They also revere their own prophets and living saints, whom they protect with fierce dedication. They are selfless to an almost alien degree, so faithful to their creed that they will gladly take a bullet for those closer to the Patriarch. They never hesitate to give their lives to protect their war leaders. This self-sacrifice, this utmost loyalty, is not enforced so much as inspired, for the martyrdom of their first Magus sent ripples throughout the cult's psyche that defines its members hundreds of years later. The Pauper Princes originally hail from the ochre-hued slum world of Chancer's Vale, which, although still listed as an Imperial-held planet, is almost entirely under the cult's sway. The first and most talented demagogue of the cult, Magus Marovich Tindark, spoke with such conviction about a new life amongst the stars that thousands of the world's impoverished citizens joined the cult in the space of a few short weeks. Swaths of the world's populace united in their devotion to the Patriarch, the Star Savior. Every Emperor's Day, the Magus sermonized to rapturous applause about the glories to come. Tindark died saving the Star Savior himself by diving in front of a rattling sniper's bullet. The abhuman assassin was torn to pieces within the hour. Tindark attained the status of saint, and the cult's flock quadrupled in size. If any cult embodies unthinking obedience to the brood mind, it is the cult of the Pauper Princes. The zealots of the cult would do literally anything to save their masters. There are reports in Ordo Xenos files of 100 extreme incidences of self-sacrifice. Some so shocking, they seem more like the behavior of an insectile hive than a group of humans. It is near impossible to bring the tactic of military decapitation to bear against this cult. For in addition to the selflessness of its broodkin, it also demonstrates a strange prescience when it comes to danger. This is especially true when the heart of its dark organization is threatened. With their war leaders living what amount to charmed lives as a result, their extreme methods have proved to be incredibly successful. As they say amongst the faithful flock, to be one of the Pauper Princes is to live forever, though none admit that it may not always be in the same body, or even same anatomy, as that of their birthright. Claws hailing from this cult typically include vast throngs of lowly faithful, tides of chanting neophyte hybrids more than willing to serve as living barricades behind which their leaders can shelter. These warriors fight all the more fervently around their acolyte icon wards and clamovusses, whose mere presence drives their brothers and sisters into near paroxysms of zealous ferocity. The Twisted Helix. The cultists of the Twisted Helix did not have the Genestealer curse thrust upon them, but instead voluntarily took it into their society through extreme medical experimentation. They harbor unnumbered biohorrors amongst their ranks, and take as their symbol a grotesque corruption of the hermetic symbol employed by the imperial Medicae institutions. The cult of the Twisted Helix spreads through the most sinister of methods, using the Imperium's limited understanding of medical science against it. The cult originated on Vehovium III, a civilized world in the Segmentum Obscurus, long ago overtaken by the industry of the macro-alchemical distilleries that manufacture its exported medicines. So influential have these complexes become, and the dynastic corporations that rule over them, that everywhere the skyline is rigid with enormous metafactoria. The war leaders and biophaguses of the Twisted Helix view themselves as self-bred deities. They clay the flesh and blood of those around them, their creations a blend of human, alien, and void stuff. They see these as nothing more than experimental subjects, and every skirmish, hostile takeover, and even large-scale uprising purely another test bed from which to draw firmer conclusions about their experiments. Using chemical compounds, they have dulled the minds of their world's populace to bovine levels of obedience, and continue to avoid serious investigations thanks to the importance of Vehovium's vast yields of Medicae supplies and void sickness pills. Pure strain Genestealers were first brought to Vehovium not as invaders, but as experimental subjects, and they were subsequently dissected. Over the course of hundreds of exhaustive experiments, the Medicae overseers learned how to extract the germ seed of the pure strain from those who have been blessed by the Genestealer's kiss. At the behest of the shadowy individual known only as the prime specimen, the implications of this discovery were exhaustively researched. It was eventually concluded that they stood on the threshold of a new evolution, that the Xenos gene pattern was the path to true perfection, and perhaps even immortality. Under strict test conditions, the aristocracy of Vehovium injected the stuff of the alien into their veins, and began their transformation into something resembling neophyte hybrids. Sure enough, after many hideous byblows and aborted experiments, they birthed a new clutch of Genestealers with which to further their agenda, albeit a brood given life in the sterile tubes of secret metafactoria. These, in turn, infected new infestation sites, and the Vehovians began to resemble a cult like any other. Subsequent experimentation led to methods of incorporating the germ seed into the curative syringe vials that form a major part of Vehovium's medical exports. In this way, the curse was spread into the veins of millions of unsuspecting citizens. Over the years, the imperfections of these bioalchemical experiments have resulted in great many monstrosities lurching from the laboratories of the Twisted Helix. Aberrations, multi-limbed hybrids, and hunchbacked brutes are common in the ward cells in which the cult keeps its shocking secrets. In times of insurgency, when the prime specimen can only achieve its aims through violence rather than subtlety, these monstrous hybrids are released by the thousands, full of steroidal serums and pain-killing salves. They make excellent shock troops, and the biophaguses who goad them to battle learn much from their performance in live fire exercises, or from their grimly demise, should their tortured metabolisms finally give in to the experimental adaptations heaped upon them.